And welcome back, fellow football fanatics, to another College Football with Sam live show. We have a lot to get to today, so thank you for tuning in. And please leave any comments you have, any thoughts you have that you want me to answer to down in the live chat. Be typing away there. If you want a guaranteed answer, that'll usually require a super chat, but if I see anything interesting, I'll try to reply to it whether or not my time is being paid for. It's just, I have limited time, love interacting with you guys, but unfortunately I'm not Superman. I need sleep, I need to eat, so I assume you're all pretty understanding of that. But let's talk some more about Week 13, specifically some blueprints for why teams in key games can win. USC versus Oregon, Michigan versus Maryland, and Penn State versus Nebraska are teams that we will be talking about in that realm. I know that a lot of people have been discussing Michigan and USC in that Big Ten private equity deal. That is a little bit above my pay grade. Maybe I should have covered it. I probably should read into it a little bit. I have seen the posts that Michigan is considering becoming an independent after the media rights deal is over. But that is like 10 years away, guys. So maybe I'll look into it a little bit more, but I want to focus on the actual football that's being played right now. And the best place to start with that is the 2025 college football playoff and the new rankings that released last night from the playoff committee. Not a whole lot changed with these rankings, honestly, but I still think there are some glaring errors and things that the College Football Playoff Committee got wrong. The College Football Playoff Committee still has yet to truly include an appropriate weight for strength of schedule. The College Football Playoff rankings, in my mind, are still somewhat of an unserious product. What you guys have to remember about the College Football Playoff rankings, and really the College Football Playoff in general, is there is merit involved with these rankings. A lot more merit than your most committed cynic will admit to. But there is still a bit of brand bias and of reality TV injected into this formula. The College Football Playoff is still a little bit secretive about these things, is very vague, and you also have to give them grace because a lot of ranking or rating teams is subjective. Most of it's objective when you watch the film and do comparative analysis, but because these conferences, they don't play each other that often, so there isn't a ton of cross-referencing outside of conferences. It's always fun and sort of like a game trying to gauge who the best teams in America actually are, especially amongst the top teams, where we've had seasons before where there is a favorite, a clear-cut favorite entering the playoffs, and after the playoffs, that team didn't win at all. Or you had upsets in the College Football Playoff semifinals, TCU over Michigan, as an example. I think Clemson over Ohio State from a power ratings angle, while not as major of an upset, was also an upset in that 2019 semifinal. And the following year after that, Ohio State upset Clemson. And we've had other games beforehand like that. Clemson over Oklahoma when Bob Stoops made his first and only College Football Playoff appearance. Georgia over Oklahoma in 2017 from a power ratings angle was probably an upset. So there is subjectivity here. There is still a large amount of margin of error, though much smaller than in weeks 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's why the committee waits to release these rankings. But even within that grace period, I think that there's a lot of inconsistencies or sketchiness or double standards, or maybe, to not be all that cynical about it, just there's some reality TV and some fun and jive and, fun. Reality TV drama injected into this. A prime example, looking at these rankings that we have up here on the screen, is your top 10, for example. Shoot, why is my camera turned off? Sorry for the technical difficulties, but I can pretty easily edit that back in. A prime example of what I'm talking about is the college football playoff rankings, specifically inside of the top 10, factoring in strength of schedule, strength of record, head-to-head, quality wins, quality or lack of quality losses, so a bad loss, for example. Look at the top 10, and you can really look at the entire top 25. Why on this beautiful earth is Notre Dame ahead of Alabama? From a power ratings angle, they're pretty close. Notre Dame is ahead of Alabama in a lot of these categories, power ratings wise. But from a strength of record angle, Oklahoma, for all we know when healthy, because they played a tougher schedule than A&M, and they play a different style of ball that isn't as suited to seducing power ratings as A&M, Oklahoma could be as good as Texas A&M, for all that we know. They are probably close enough to where A&M being ahead of Oklahoma is within margin of error, and actually Oklahoma could be the better team. Oklahoma's ranked ahead of Miami right now. I know that the Florida State loss is pretty ugly, for sure, but it was week 1, and Alabama is power rated similarly to Notre Dame. At that point, you should go with who's played the tougher strength of schedule. That would be the Alabama Crimson Tide. Notre Dame is ranked as high as they are. They should get in the playoffs if they win out, and that will sort itself out. But as of right here, right now, they're ahead of Alabama and up this high because of reality TV and because they're fun to watch offensively. That's why. Take a look at Ole Miss ahead of Oregon. Oregon is unanimously superior in power ratings. There's little to no argument against that. Oregon is 3rd in FPI. They're 4th in S&P Plus. The Ducks are 9-1, and Ole Miss is 10-1. When you look at strength of record, Oregon, for some reason, is behind Ole Miss. I guess that's because Ole Miss beat Oklahoma, and from that sense, maybe I can understand Ole Miss being ahead. When you look at strength of schedule, though, they're very similar. When you look at game control, Oregon's ahead, just as they are in power ratings. And Indiana is viewed by power ratings and by even the College Football Playoff Committee itself as superior to Georgia. So Oregon has the better loss, strength of schedule's equal, and they're power rated higher. So from my perspective, I think Oregon should be ahead of Ole Miss. It's similar too with Texas Tech. If you're going to rank Ole Miss ahead of Oregon because Ole Miss is a better win, well, they have a better win than Texas Tech does. Oklahoma's ranked ahead of Utah. They're not rated ahead of Utah. No, but part of that might be due to the fact that while Utah is a good team and maybe even close to Oklahoma, Utah's played a much easier strength of schedule and they have a better offense than Oklahoma. And power ratings, I think, often are much more biased towards high-flying offenses than high-flying defenses for a lot of the time. So if you're going to have that sequence there of Tech, Ole Miss, and Oregon in that order, I just don't think that makes sense. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm nitpicking here. BYU should, at a 9-1 record where they got smoked by Texas Tech, yes, they beat Utah, but BYU's strength of schedule here, it's 27th. I don't know how their strength of record is 6th. Part of me doesn't even know how their strength of schedule is 27th. They're a good team. They're well coached. If they win out, they should get in. But again, that should sort itself out. As of here and now, Miami, for example, has a better win. They're power rated higher. Miami has played, let me see in terms of strength of schedule. Oh, well, ESPN says their strength of schedule is weaker. Regardless, I just think that we got to factor in outside of strength of schedule, though we should be doing that, some power rating stuff when records are not super off base. So, for example, if Tennessee were in the top 15, that would be absolutely ridiculous, but they're not. They're 20th. Texas is ahead of Michigan at 7-3 over an 8-2 Michigan because their strength of schedule is 6th and Michigan's 34th, and they're power rated higher. From that aspect, I can actually understand why Texas is ranked ahead of Michigan. And if both teams win out, Michigan beating Ohio State will be more impressive than Texas beating Texas A&M, and Michigan will then probably jump Texas at that point. Again, it'll all sort itself out. But when I see BYU 6th, for example, their strength of schedule again 27th, Georgia Tech's is 88th. So I guess from that angle, we see some appropriate rankings there. I just think that the College Football Playoff Committee still has some inconsistent rules and guidelines that need to be revealed, and they need to be made firmer. So we're going by more similar criteria. That criteria is public. Tulane, for example, at 8-2, being in the top 25. Arizona State being inside the top 25 when Arizona State, starting QB's hurt. They have not looked incredible. I know they have that win over Texas Tech, but that was with a different team. And Tulane's strength of schedule isn't all that strong, and yet they're somehow, up here for reasons that I can't exactly describe. I mean, they got blown out by UTSA. Like, Washington should be ranked in their place, for example, especially if Arizona State is going to be. Nebraska should be ranked in their place. Even a 4-loss Iowa would probably be more deserving of that ranking than Tulane. Like, come on, guys. That and then Arizona State, I think, is a little bit, excessive, just wrong, I guess, is how I would phrase it. But those are the rankings. You've seen them. Just before we get on out of here to the next part, the bracket, just quickly naming off the top 10 teams, as that's what matters. Ohio State, Indiana, A&M, Georgia, Texas Tech, Ole Miss, Oregon, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, and Alabama in that order from 1 to 10. Your 11 through 15 is BYU, Utah, Miami, Vanderbilt, and USC. And your highest-ranked G5 team is Tulane. All the other conferences are included, at least the highest-ranked champions, or the highest-ranked teams who are projected to be the champions, all by the College Football Playoff Committee. They use the highest-ranked team as the placeholder for that auto berth until the conference championship games are here and gone. Everyone else is inside of that top 15. Let's take a look then at the bracket by how the committee currently sees things. We'd have Ohio State, Indiana, Texas A&M, and Georgia receiving first-round byes. A&M being the projected champion of the SEC, Ohio State of the Big Ten, Indiana being the runner-up, and Georgia. Georgia needs A&M to lose. So if A&M wins out, it's almost impossible for Georgia to get in if Alabama also wins out, which Alabama is favored to win out. Just as a little bit of a tiebreaker thing. But you could also say the same thing with the ACC, where I highly doubt Miami is going to win the ACC. They could get in as an at-large, though, depending on how things finish out. Speaking of the at-large selections, outside of Tulane, who's the 12th seed, we have Texas Tech, not an at-large, but they're in the first round. They get the 5 seed. They're a part of the highest-ranked 5 conference champions of the Big 12. You have Ole Miss at 6th, Oregon at 7th, Oklahoma at 8th, Notre Dame at 9th, Alabama at 10th, and Miami, who is the ACC champion in this scenario, at 11th. Within this bracket, this is really, really tricky. I think Ohio State's path is really good. Notre Dame, I think, is a team that cannot match up well with Ohio State. Ohio State would cook that secondary, and I don't think Notre Dame would run the ball on them at all, because Ohio State's the king of defending outside zone and defending the style of rushing attack that Notre Dame has. And Ohio State might have a better defense than Oklahoma. They're one of the few teams that can even say that, and their offense is way better. So that would just be, they'd have a clear path to the semifinals at least. Georgia with Texas Tech, that would be tough. A&M would have a tough matchup. Indiana's would also be tough. I would pick Ohio State probably in this bracket to go on and win it all, as they're the best team. At the very worst, I think they're top 3, maybe 4th. But regardless of where they are ratings-wise, and as of right now they're first, I think that this path gives them kind of a jolt in that quarterfinal. And with how close the field is, that would matter a ton. Indiana would have to play one of Alabama or Oregon, who's significantly more talented than them, and whoever they face in the semifinal, unless it's Ole Miss, similar story. Same thing with who they face likely in the national championship. Ohio State would get a Georgia team who would have to probably play a more physical game than Ohio State would against Oklahoma or Notre Dame. You see what I'm saying? This bracket obviously will not be the actual bracket because of how unlikely it is for some of these teams, such as Miami, to make it with the requirement to be the highest ranked, one of the 5 highest ranked conference champions. If Miami makes it, it's going to be an at-large bid, and there will be some more teams who lose and who suffer upsets. There will be some teams on here who might seem like shoo-ins, but maybe a loss or two takes them out of the picture entirely. That's my reaction to the Week 13 College Football Playoff Bracket and College Football Playoff Top 25 rankings presented by the College Football Playoff Committee. As for other topics to talk about, we have some more previews. I also have some discussion that I want to bring forth about Georgia and about Kirby Smart. Let's see if there's any chats to answer. As of right now, no. But thank you to Chris Lane and thank you to Michael Valadez for being moderators on the channel and being active in the chat. It's also good to see John Mandock, Span Marchiola, Pigolo, and Kevin Chavis. Thank you for being in this chat and participating in it. I want to discuss, though, Kirby Smart and the win over Texas and why I think that proves that, as of right now, Kirby Smart is still the nation's best head coach, at least as of today. That could change in a few months. I think that if Cignetti hoists the trophy again with if he does it 16-0, if Day goes 16-0, I think there at that point would be an argument. But what I saw from Kirby in the tactical genius sense against Texas was very impressive. Here's why Georgia's win over Texas proves that Kirby Smart is still on top of his game. He's not regressing. He's not taking a step back. And he is still the nation's best college football coach and best tactician. So Georgia was able to beat Texas, and not just beat them, but crush them in the end, 35-10. Outside of that initial Texas drive where they kicked a field goal, they never led. Georgia had a touchdown drive following that Texas field goal drive, and Georgia led for the rest of the game. And they dominated them through the air. They came alive in pressuring the quarterback, in earning a pass rush. Gunnar Stockton looked like the NFL first-round 5-star quarterback that people said Arch Manning was in the preseason. And Georgia's defense looked like Georgia's defense, which they have not all season long. This has been one of the least productive and least effective Kirby Smart defenses. And Texas's defense, especially later in the game as they couldn't get off the field and Georgia recovered that beautiful onside kick call, they were able to keep the Longhorn defense on the field and eventually open the can of worms and really just beat down the Horns in Athens. It was a very impressive win. And I think that the adjustments Georgia makes in games is the biggest supporting factor behind the coach and the man that Kirby Smart is and what he's built. So I know that Georgia has not been the number one program over like the past 2 years, or even I would say 3 years. 4 years you might be able to say yes. But ever since 2023, I think Ohio State's been better pretty much every year. That might change this year. For much of this year, though, I've had Ohio State ahead. I don't just want to take 1 week of me thinking Georgia's the best team and taking away from what Ohio State has done and also what other teams have done. From a holistic view, Georgia this year and last year has often been disappointing, and you've seen Ohio State succeed at a high level. Oregon went undefeated last year, while Georgia struggled to go 10-2. They were limping along to that. A lot of that, though, has been the fact that they have played much tougher strength of schedules than many other teams in football. Last year, they may have had one of the tougher schedules in college football history. This year, it isn't as tough, but it's tougher than the majority of schedules in the Big Ten, especially for teams at the top. Same thing with other SEC teams even, and obviously the best ACC and Big 12 teams. The adjustments I've seen this year, where they were able to make Ole Miss's offense look pedestrian in the fourth quarter. They changed some things up. I think they were really focused on making sure that Ole Miss was getting into third and long situations in that fourth quarter, keeping everything in front of them, and they were able to make Chambliss look mortal and look more like a D2 quarterback than the amazing top 10 quarterback that he's been for times this season. You then go to this Texas-Georgia game, and Georgia scores. They make it 21-10 after Texas gets a touchdown to close it to 14-10, and they decide, you know what, Texas has maybe figured us out a bit on defense. They scored their first touchdown. We want to put this game away. Let's kick the onside kick. And they recover it. Texas really wasn't all that prepared for it, and they go up 28-10. And at that point, Texas has to abandon their entire offense and do what they can't do against a good defense, rely on Arch Manning to carry them to victory. They could do it against Mississippi State, but that's Mississippi State and not Georgia. So the adjustments that Georgia has made this year and last year especially are impressive. The adjustments they made in 2022 against Ohio State, impressive as well. But when you discover how good a coach is when they have to face adversity and they do not have the most talented roster, that's where you truly find out who they are. With Ryan Day, I think we found out a lot about who he was as a coach in 2023 and 2021. When in 2021, their roster from a recruiting standpoint was probably overvalued. And if you factored in some development and scheme and coordinator moves, they probably were not the third most talented roster. When you look at how they performed in 2023, right? I think the 2023 team was actually a really good Ohio State team, but it didn't fit the traditional Ryan Day team. So they had a lot of identity issues early on, and they were still able to win in spite of that and some limitations at quarterback from Kyle McCord, among other things. That tells you who Day is. Yes, responding to what Michigan did last year and the loss to Oregon and going on that run also says something, but they had the best roster by quite a mile. This year, we'll see how they perform in the playoffs. I imagine they're much closer to being the best team in America than they were in say, 2021. It's the same thing with Georgia and Kirby Smart. 2021 and 2022 showed you he's an elite coach, but this year and last year, I think, also shows that to an even greater degree, when not every evaluation has gone their way, roster-wise, or they've played tougher schedules, faced better teams, and therefore the tiniest of decisions matters more. They have to be more clutch. And we've seen that last year and this year with Georgia. Last thing I'll say about the adjustments, Georgia last year had 3 games. I keep bringing up the stat because it's so genius, that Carson Beck had 3 or more turnovers in, and they went 2-1 in those games. And the 2 wins were by double digits. The 1 loss was against Alabama on the road, in which they nearly had a comeback. That takes the lead adjustments there. And look at last year against Bama, where they nearly came back. And look at the SEC championship game against Texas, where Texas was dominating them. And then after that game, it felt like Georgia was in control, even with the backup QB, and they go on to win in overtime. Same thing with this year against Texas. Same thing this year, I would say, even with Alabama, where they won the second half. It just wasn't by enough for them to ultimately win. You get the point. Their culture is also strong. It's one of the best cultures and toughest cultures in college football. It's the same thing with Ohio State. Guys, one of the best cultures and toughest cultures exists in Columbus. It's the same thing with Georgia. You look at their development. They consistently send 10 or more players to the NFL draft on an annual basis. Last year they sent 13. And in the 2024 draft, I think it was 8. The year before that, I believe, was 10. And the year before that, they tied the record for 15. Incredible stuff. They are an NFL factory. NFL factory. So Smart has checked that box. He's checked the cultural box. I think his biggest edge, and why I spent the most time talking about this, maybe I should have closed with that instead of leading with it, is the adjustments. I don't think any coach makes the adjustments that he does. There are some other areas where other coaches are probably better than him in, but I think adjustments is the one where, as of right now, he's king. Even Cincinnati and Day, who I've sung their praises and will continue to do so, I have not seen them make quite the number of games where the script totally flips, or Georgia or Indiana or Ohio State win in these unexpected ways in big games because of specifically what their coaches did. Day did that last year in the playoffs. Cincinnati did that this year with the Oregon game. But I've seen Kirby Smart do this for several years in a row, where his team had the matchup disadvantage or they were straight up viewed as inferior, and they came out on top due to adjustments made by him and the staff. They win in different ways. That's another aspect here. So they can win sometimes dominating you on the ground or with the passing attack, or even where they're outgained. SEC championship game last year. And they find ways to come out on top in those scenarios. Again, he's not the only coach to do this, but he's done this more times than I can count on a hand. For example, like Ohio State in 2022. They won that game with offense and then very late defensive adjustments, but more so offense. In 2024 against Florida, they won with defense in that game, and like completely limiting Florida down and knocking Lagway out of the game. Texas, both times, they won with their defensive line, and the second time they won with the backup QB. This year with Texas, they won with the passing attack and with their defense coming alive in different ways as well. So they win in different ways. And then last but not least, I do want to take a look at one final point. And that final point for Georgia and why Kirby Smart is the nation's best head coach is how he has success in big games, which, again, not the only coach to do so, but wins over what? Texas, Ole Miss, Texas twice last year, for example. Tennessee at home last year was a big win, won that by double digits. And then 2023, they didn't really have any big wins outside of maybe that. Well, no, Ole Miss and Missouri at home. Those were good wins. Missouri was close, but they won that. They destroyed Ole Miss. Year before that, beating Ohio State, beating TCU, winning the SEC championship game. Year before that, beating Michigan, and then beating Alabama in round 2. Smart has success in big games. So all of these things combined, I think, make him the best head coach in college football as it stands today. Is he being challenged for that right now? Sure. But unless you're Nick Saban, I think whoever is at the top is always going to be challenged. And even Saban himself, at the beginning of his career, had to show that he was at the top of the mountain. And towards the end, people were challenging him at the mountaintop too. That is the life of being the nation's best head coach, is you will always be challenged. But as of right now, I would give the honor of being number 1 to Kirby Smart. Okay, some more previews. Some more previews that I have. I don't know who was calling me. I think that was spam. They'll leave me a message if it wasn't. Some more previews here that we can get to. Starting off with Michigan State and Iowa. These will all be pretty brief. Some things that I didn't get to on Monday that I want to get to now on Wednesday. Michigan State travels to Iowa after... that was a brutal loss to Penn State. That was a brutal, heartbreaking loss where the score did not express how dominant Penn State's performance was. The Iowa Hawkeyes host the Michigan State Spartans after 2 back-to-back heartbreaking losses where Iowa, it looked like they may have been able to pull away late against Oregon, and then Dante Moore and his receivers connect 4 times in a row to give Atticus Sappington the opportunity to kick the game-winning field goal, and he makes it. And then against USC, you hold that 21-7 lead at one point. USC outscores you 19-0 to win 26-21. Iowa, quite literally just a handful of plays away this year from being 9-1 or 8-2 and in the college football playoff picture. This will be a prime opportunity for revenge, though. 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on FS1. Iowa's favored by about 16.5 points. For the Hawkeyes, they should convincingly win this game. But Michigan State, whether it was against Minnesota, whether it was against Michigan for about a half, or Nebraska for 3/4, or USC for 3/4, they have had a actually shocking knack of performing better on the road than at home, if you really think about it. So Boston College, horrible performance given BC only has one win. Youngstown State, awful performance. Western Michigan, pretty bad in the second half, though they looked good in the first half. USC and Nebraska, they were competitive in those games, more so than the Nebraska game, where they had a really good chance to win in that second half, and then it all fell apart. Indiana, they performed fairly well against a healthy Indiana team, for my money's worth. Against Michigan, I think the reason they kept it close had more so to do with Michigan than Michigan State themselves. And as for Minnesota, they should have won that game. They outgained Minnesota by around 200 yards. I do think that the pessimism from the Spartan fan base, which has really existed since the beginning of the Jonathan Smith era, and especially since the end of last year, if that's being too harsh, probably affects this team in a certain way. And I feel like they can cut it more loose on the road, and they've put better performances forth on the road. Their passing attack can be pretty hit or miss. Their offense in general can be. The defense has stepped up in a big way ever since, I would say, the UCLA game. They looked better against Indiana. Indiana's offense is just that good. From there on out, they've played pretty good football, but the offense ever since Big Ten play started outside of that USC game, where we know USC has a little bit of a dysfunctional defensive roster, has not performed well at all, and they're going to face a tough task against an Iowa defense that's flirting with being a top 5 unit this year. For the Hawkeyes, close loss after close loss. So Iowa used to always be on the right side of close wins. Always. 2023, perfect example of this. 2021, perfect example. 2022, not so much. 2024, they lost all of their close games outside of, I think, the Nebraska one and maybe one other. This year, they are 1-4 in close games. And Kirk Ferentz is an expert in these situations. I would argue the reason he has 4 close losses outside of the Iowa State game is that 3 of those 4 close losses are teams that were dramatically better than his. Indiana and Oregon are several touchdowns better than Iowa, I think, in their own home stadiums and maybe even neutral field. USC at home probably is closer to a double-digit point favorite over Iowa than just 6.5. But Kirk Ferentz is able to allow his unit to punch above their weight class. So against Oregon and Indiana at home, they play them competitively instead of getting blown out, but they just can't get the win because those teams are more talented and they're also coached at a high level, and I would argue a better level than Iowa is. So even a legend like Kirk Ferentz with defense, fundamental soundness, close games, and game control can't escape the law of close games. Keep that in mind. Keep it in mind, ladies and gentlemen. As for who I think is going to win this game, it's pretty simple. Iowa's better at every position outside of wide receiver and maybe tight end, which could be a push, but they're better on the O-line, running back, quarterback, every position on defense, better at kicker. Eckley might be the better punter than Dakin, but superior staff, roster, talent, pass offense, rush offense, those same things on defense. In the trenches, Michigan State might do an admirable job of slowing down Iowa's offense due to the nature of their rushing attack, and MSU stepped up there in rush defense, but I like Iowa here to win, and I don't know if I like this cover pick as much as when I made this graphic, or not made the graphic, but, edited the graphic, put my input in here. But I do think Iowa might be able to force some turnovers, and this will be Michigan State's toughest defense that they've played since Indiana's on the road. And unlike in that game where you had Aiden Giles playing, and Giles' ceiling is limitless. His floor is just very low. Michigan State's new quarterback, Milihojevic, I think is his name. I know what his name is. I just don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Alessio Milihojevic. His ceiling is not as high. And Michigan State is definitely on quit watch here as well, while Iowa's going to be furious over those Oregon and USC games. So love Iowa here to win. Don't know if I love them to cover, but if I had to lean one way, I would pick them to cover. So that is exactly what I'm going to be picking them to do here. It's going to probably be a blowout, or if Michigan State keeps it competitive, I just don't see how they can win this game with the style of team they have, the level of coaching and depth they have, and how anti-clutch they've been. BYU at Cincinnati is a totally different game. BYU versus Cincinnati is a game that essentially determines the Big 12 championship game and determines even the destiny of the Big 12. If Cincinnati wins, think about it this way. BYU's not making the college football playoff. They're 11th. They're one of the lowest ranked one-loss teams, if not maybe the lowest one-loss team. I forget if they are exactly the lowest, but they're one of the lowest. They're 9-1, 6-1, ranked 11th. They're power rated inside of most top 25s, top 20s, but not quite top 15 or top 10. Their strength of schedule metrics actually surprised me. I thought they'd be worse, but they have a tougher strength of schedule than some people realize. I love Kalani Sitake. I think that him and Jay Hill and Aaron Roderick have one of the better staffs in America. They know how to punch above their weight class, squeeze all the talent they can get out of their players. They're only 2.5-point favorites over Cincinnati on the road, and this will be a big noon kickoff game in terms of location. Not the broadcast. This will be an 8 p.m. Eastern time game on Fox, but big noon kickoff will have their morning show at this location, which I love. This is a big game. Don't let anyone get that mistaken. Cincinnati has had some unfortunate losses go their way. Close loss to Arizona and Nebraska. Blowout loss to Utah. This is going to be a big game. It's a big game for Scott Satterfield, for Brennan Sorsby, for that Cincinnati program. It's the same thing for BYU, because Cincinnati, unless they win this game and win out, and even if they win out, they wouldn't win the tiebreaker over Utah, for example. I don't even think there is a path for them at currently 7-3, 5-2 in the Big 12 to reach the Big 12 championship game, barring absolute chaos where all the teams ahead of them lose, which it is the Big 12, so I guess that is possible, but the likelihood of that happening, I don't exactly know. They don't have much to lose here. BYU has everything to lose. If BYU wins this game, they're probably beating UCF and then going to the Big 12 championship game. And if they enter the Big 12 championship game at 11-1 and play Texas Tech more competitively than they did in Lubbock, I think there's a really good chance they could go to the playoffs with where they're currently ranked. Cincinnati is not ranked, but they were ranked 25th last week. And with 11 wins and one bad loss, but another loss that's competitive against a 12-1 Texas Tech team, hypothetically, I think there's a good chance they might still get in. If they beat Texas Tech, they're definitely in the playoffs. The Big 12 should want BYU to win because it gives them the opportunity to get two teams in. For Cincinnati here, a win here and then closing out the season with the road game against TCU gives you an opportunity to have some redemption and to have that feeling of the Cincinnati of old under Luke Fickell, where you've beaten multiple competent teams this year, or at least you have if you will have won out. Iowa State no longer looks like one of those teams as it did at the time Cincinnati won that game in dominant fashion. You'll have won multiple games. You'll have flirted in the month of November with the Big 12 championship game, with a Big 12 championship game appearance. And that is important for building your program's prestige, for recruiting, for coaching stability, for getting buy-in, which I don't think Cincinnati necessarily has a ton of buy-in. Again, this is a massive game. And I do think BYU is better coached. I do think from an overall team angle, these teams are pretty similar. If I had to lean one way, I'd lean BYU. I will say, though, I think BYU might be a little bit puffed up from a ratings angle. Don't know how true that is. I don't. That blowout win over TCU was pretty impressive. And I do think that if I had to lean one way, they would be the better team. That's why they're favored here. But upsets happen. Cincinnati knows how to run the ball. Do they know how to play defense all that well? Not particularly. But upsets happen. Weird performances happen. I mean, I've seen BYU this year play Arizona in overtime on the road. Iowa State was a close game, and then BYU got that pick six, and Texas Tech just was not competitive at all. BYU at home is, I think, showcased by the TCU game, and the BYU game is better than BYU on the road. For Cincinnati, losing to Arizona at home, I think might have been indicative of a look-ahead spot for that BYU game. So I like BYU here to compete, and they could certainly win. I don't think Cincinnati will blow them out, but I do think Cincinnati will pull off that upset. Looking at the Big 12 standings here, if BYU wins this game, and again, they'll likely beat UCF because UCF's not good, especially on the road. They'll probably rematch with Texas Tech in the Big 12 championship game. If they lose here with their conference win-loss record combined, if there is another team tied with them, and presumably Utah, who should win out after that Baylor game, Utah would probably play in a rematch against Texas Tech in the Big 12 championship game. Not to hate on BYU, but I do think Utah would have a better chance at beating Tech than BYU in a rematch. Nonetheless, though, I don't think you're going to get that rematch between Tech and BYU because I think BYU will lose here and Cincinnati will win and cover. Another game to look at in the Big 12. You got Kansas State. The Kansas State Wildcats travel to the Utah Utes. Utah ranked 12th. BYU, their rival, is at 11th. You got two Utah schools inside the top 12, some of the first four out in the projected college football playoff rankings. In this 4 p.m. Eastern time kickoff in Rice-Eccles in Salt Lake City, Utah's favored by 17.5, and the Utes can just taste it, where they're so close to reaching the college football playoff, whether as potentially a Big 12 champion if BYU is able to incur a loss in their final two games, or maybe as an at-large, if they can win out and some chaos ahead of them happens without bumping up a team below them ahead of them, and then you get a Utah as a road team, sure, but in the playoffs regardless after last year's 5-7 campaign. And how much of a Kyle Whittingham moment would that be? He's one of the best head coaches in the sport of college football. More respect needs to be put on his name for the job that he's done this year, for the culture that he's built, for the coaching stability, both from a coordinator angle and him staying there for this long angle and having sustainable success. He needs to be given more credit, and his roster needs to be given more credit. This is the second best team in the Big 12. Make no mistake about it. It is no coincidence that when you look at Utah, they have dominated pretty much everyone outside of BYU and outside of Texas Tech. But we'll talk about their schedule a little bit later. As for Kansas State, we have theirs pulled up. Let's go over the road team. So Kansas State's rebounded a bit after their loss to Iowa State and then near loss to North Dakota, loss to Army. They really kind of got dominated by Arizona. Arizona just missed some field goals, missed some opportunities, and Kansas State got some big plays. Lost in a close one to Baylor, got smoked by Texas Tech, but who hasn't outside of a healthy Arizona State on the road or at home against Texas Tech, you know what I meant. They've been able to beat TCU, Kansas, and UCF pretty convincingly. They were able to beat Oklahoma State, just survive in advance, probably looking ahead a bit to this game against Utah, where if Chris Kleiman wants to have a successful season, finishing 6-6 with wins over nobodies outside of TCU in that rivalry game against Kansas, that's not going to cut it. You want to come out here, go on the road, beat Utah, beat Colorado, and enter your bowl season with a winning record, with a chance to win 8 games, and at worst, you finish 7-5, 6-3 in the Big 12. That's a pretty impressive rebound given how the season started. For Utah, though, Utah's looking at bigger fish to fry. Every team they've played, outside of Texas Tech and BYU, they've won by, at minimum, 25 points or more. 4 possessions or more in every one of their wins. 4-score lead to close it out. Outside, again, of their losses. BYU by 3, Texas Tech by 24, but that was a close game in the fourth quarter. Even like midway fourth quarter. Just got out of hand later because Utah was trying to win. And when you try to win late, when you're down by 2 scores, it can sometimes get out of hand with turnovers, pick sixes, or your defense trying to sell out to get the big play, and they failed to do so. Winning out here against a Kansas State team who probably is going to go 6-6 and a Kansas team that's flirting with going 6-6, that would only add to their resume, especially if they keep scoring this many points and winning with this type of, margin of victory. That'll buff up their power rating. That'll buff up their resume. That'll give them a better chance to reach the college football playoff as an at-large team. Ultimately, I know they want that rematch with Texas Tech, though, in the Big 12 championship game. And I actually think with a Cincinnati upset over BYU this weekend, which I did predict to happen, and with Utah winning out here and likely winning big in these games, I think that will happen. They wouldn't be favored over Texas Tech, nor should they be, but it would be an interesting rematch. And Whittingham is, I would say at this point, at least a top 10 coach, if not a top 5 coach. Kleiman, I respect. I don't pin all of this on him, though some of it is obviously on him. I just think Utah is a different animal from the rest of the Big 12 outside of Texas Tech. And maybe they're not a different animal than BYU, but they're better than the Cougars. So Utah being the second best Big 12 team, they honestly are playing like a Big 10 team. They could win in the Big 10. And with Kansas State kind of being on life support, I love Utah to win and cover here. And in a big way, too. I think that Utah will win this game pretty convincingly in dominant fashion. Last preview of the night, Rutgers playing Ohio State. The Rutgers Scarlet Knights travel to play the Ohio State Buckeyes. Maybe a bit of a look-ahead spot for the Buckeyes ahead of the Michigan game where they're early 12.5-point favorites. We will be doing an early preview of that game later in the week. Rutgers coming off of a bye, so you get a feeling that, maybe there could be something here. Not in the sense of necessarily a Rutgers victory. That would be very unlikely and shocking to me. There's a reason Ohio State's a 31.5-point favorite. But the line at one point was 33.5. It's come down a little bit. This will be a Fox. This will be a game on Fox. I'm just kind of thinking, was I wrong for saying Cincinnati BYU was big noon kickoff or not? Because it's here twice. I don't think I was wrong. Anyway, Rutgers travels to Ohio State. The Buckeyes are ranked first, 10-0, 7-0 in Big Ten play. They're undefeated. Rutgers is coming off a bye at 5-5, 2-5 in Big Ten play. The line opened up at Ohio State minus 33.5, but it's come down to minus 30, minus 31.5. What is the path here for Rutgers to make this interesting? Well, when you look at Rutgers, they are more of an offensive team. Outside of a road game at Illinois and a home game against Oregon and maybe that Washington game. But they had offensive success. They just couldn't get it in the end zone and failed its fourth down conversions. This team has been led on offense. Saw that in the Maryland game. Saw that even against Purdue. And you saw that in really their first 4 or 5 games. I would even argue 6 of the regular season. Oregon punked them. It was a bad spot for Rutgers, given Oregon was angry after the Indiana game. They got punked by Illinois. History, matchups, power ratings would tell you they'll probably get punked by Ohio State, too. Even in look-ahead spots, entering the game, we've seen Minnesota get punked by Ohio State in 2023. We saw Indiana last year, although I don't think Ohio State was looking ahead to Michigan there because Michigan wasn't extremely good. But They punked Indiana, destroyed them last year. And this year, we'll have to see. But the last time Ohio State really struggled in a look-ahead spot entering the Michigan game was 2022 against Maryland on the road. Every other year, the week before the Michigan game, outside of maybe 2019 against a really good Penn State team, they haven't played sloppy. Speaking of Penn State, that's the other team Rutgers has left on their schedule, and thankfully they're at home and they play them because the odds say that Rutgers should not be counting on this game to reach bowl eligibility. As for the Buckeyes here, 10-0, dominance in every game outside of that game against Texas, which was close. They just came out on the right side of it due to proper coaching. Every other game has been a either dominant win from the get-go, or eventually they pulled away and won in dominant fashion. They are the number one program in college football. Day's fighting to be the best head coach. This team is fighting to win it all, to repeat, to beat Michigan, to win the Big Ten, and to be the number one team yet again as they were last year. It's impressive what this team has done. And even though they are probably going to sit out Carnell Tate, or maybe him and Jeremiah Smith, we'll see how they play this game, like what starters they rest or whatnot. Regardless of that, I think Ohio State's better in every way here. And I do consequentially think that Ohio State wins and covers. Now, I also think that Rutgers has a chance to score points, and I think in the same way that UCLA did, they will probably score 10. I would even say there might be a chance they score north of 10 with the receivers, with the quarterback, with the fact they do have a really good offense. But Rutgers' defense is bad. And I know that Ohio State isn't just going to want to run it 60 times and get it out of there. That's not their style of play. That is, not going to be the most effective way for them to get up big on an opponent and rest their starters. You also have to keep in mind that if Day has learned his lesson about running the football, or more importantly about playing to the strength of his team, of which running the ball is not one of those, that means he'll pass in general and only run when it situationally benefits him or to keep the defense honest. So I think Ohio State, even with opt-outs, has a real chance to score 50 plus here, even though I think Rutgers has a chance to potentially be that first team to hit 20. Don't think they will, but I think they'll hit at least 10. And I think Ohio State yet again will run for 200 plus. Like UCLA and Rutgers are some of the worst run defenses in America, and Ohio State, just from a talent angle, can beat teams that are smaller, banged up, not very deep, and just not fundamentally sound. And neither UCLA or Rutgers are those things defensively. So I love Ohio State here, obviously to win, but to continue their amazing streak of being, 8-1-1 ATS. They'll move on to 9-1-1 ATS, and under that Michigan game is understandably and deservingly so big favorites. Well, we're through the previews, guys. We are through the previews. So that's a really good thing. Now we can move on to some other things, topics about why certain teams, what's the blueprint for certain teams to win. That's what we can move on to. Let me see. Nope, no super chats, nothing like that. But there is some interesting commentary. Some people saying that Day is the best head coach in football. It's not particularly close. I mean, we'll see. Oh, that's Super Saiyan. That's not the same comment as the other one. Similar colors in the profile photo. That's why. I do agree that Ohio State needs to chill about injuries. I agree with that. I don't think there isn't any reason to panic unless they re-enter a game and then exit again with injury. And not like in the sense of subbed out, but you see them get hurt again and then they leave, because you never want to re-injure things. But I'm not concerned. I think that Ohio State will, at least the receivers will play and be healthy. I know that as everyone has at this point some type of like injuries in the O-line, but I imagine Ohio State's players, they're pretty tough. They'll play through that too. And even if the receivers are banged up in the Michigan game, they'll play. They'll play. Like, that game means a lot to Ohio State. It does. Like, if those receivers are playable and Ohio State, for whatever reason, decides to, like, rest because, like, they want to save them for the postseason, then just based on that mentality with how Michigan treats the rivalry, at that point, Michigan will probably win. But I don't think that's going to happen. Like, Ryan Day's problem with Michigan, guys, the media and some Ohio State fans used to think otherwise, and now they pretend that they never did. His problem was never not caring about the game. It was it was having to win a certain way. It was basically having to like prove that like Ohio State has a bigger junk than Michigan, which is just absolutely insane. And if he hasn't learned his lesson from that, then he never will. But whatever. It is what it is. That was the problem. It was never that he didn't care. If you have to prove to someone that your thing is bigger than their thing, you care. That's not, oh, I don't care, so I'm going to prove it. No, you care. And that's why you have to show that you can do that. That's been Day's problem, is the way he cares. He's always cared about that because he's not an idiot and he understands Ohio State. But speaking of Ohio State's rival with Michigan, let's talk about Michigan and their... My nose just had to clear that. Their blueprint to beat the Maryland Terrapins. Here is the blueprint for Michigan to beat Maryland on the road as 13.5-point favorites and hopefully cover, get them out of there healthy, and prepare for their game against Ohio State. Number one, most important, I would say. Gosh, how did I get those mixed up? I didn't mean to do that. Gosh, did not mean to. Is everything else correct? Yes, everything else is correct. My apologies about that, guys. Everything else is correct. Outside of that. There we go. Okay, so it's actually the blueprint for Maryland to beat Michigan is the first thing. Going with underdogs first, then the favorites. Here is the blueprint for Maryland to upset Michigan and to get one step closer to bowl eligibility in a year where Mike Locksley and the Terrapins, with Malik Washington, Sidney Stewart, Zahir Mathis, and those talented group of freshmen, started out hot, but have cooled off and are currently on a 6-game losing streak and a 3-game losing streak of losing by more than one score. Most important for Michigan here is to make sure they get out healthy and to make sure that they can generate enough offense to get up big on Maryland here. So therefore, what's most important for Maryland is making sure that they can force some turnovers and really put this offense in the same pigeonhole that Purdue and Northwestern were able to. And how do you do that? I think you do that by pressuring Underwood, where under duress, under pressure, he wants to make things happen, be the it factor. He's just not quite there yet, doesn't have the receiver depth, supporting cast. He doesn't have a lot of things necessary to do that. So not letting him be clean in the pocket, stand in a clean pocket, not letting him be able to go through his reads and trying to get him to force things because he has to get the ball out quickly. That is, I think, key number one for Maryland to beat Michigan here. If they're not able to get pressure, so if Sidney Stewart and Zahir Mathis, Cam Rice, if that defensive front is held in check, then not only will Michigan be able to run the ball because they're usually ahead of the chains, but if Maryland is able to put forth a good effort on run defense, which statistically is unlikely, then what will happen is Underwood will be in a clean pocket and he can just piece them apart through the air. Because while Maryland's defense has statistically looked good, they're closer to a paper tiger more than anything. They're thin, they're spotty, their strength is up front on the defensive line with some young, talented players who are athletic and probably will have an NFL future at some point. But they're not a great defense. They can be got in a variety of ways. And how do you stop that? Well, you get pressure and you move Michigan's tackles back with your defensive ends, with your edge rushers. Another point, another part of the blueprint for Maryland is selling out versus the run. Michigan's receivers have struggled with drops. They only have 2 competent receivers. One in Andrew Marsh is looking like he could be phenomenal. The other in McCulley is just okay. Can sometimes be good, but is inconsistent. Everyone else, most notably Samaj Morgan, who's their third receiver, he's their starter, he's bad. And everyone else kind of is too. So risk it with them And if you sell out versus the run, if you blitz, if you bring pressure and Michigan can't pick up your blitzes, or you can get pressure with 4, which is even better. Also, stack the box. Sell out versus the run. That's what Michigan is going to want to do. Even if they want to modernize on offense, they would preferably run it 60 times in a row here to make sure they get everyone out healthy, because they're probably going to rest Jordan Marshall in this game and then move on and play their best game against Ohio State if that's possible. So sell out versus the run, make them throw to beat you, and that is where the problems arise with Michigan's offense, where Bryce Underwood is I think 7-5 touchdown to interception ratio. Throw to run is an important thing to do for Malik Washington, for Mike Locksley, for Pep Hamilton, for that Maryland offense. Maryland's offensive line isn't all that good. They are not great in pass protection, but they are far worse in run blocking. And it's not like Maryland has great running backs either. They could have used Roman Hemby again this year. Happy for Hemby I am, because I think he's in a better circumstance and probably getting paid more. But it just wasn't going to work out. Maryland has to put that money at this point to younger players, as Hemby is a senior this year. Anyway, throw to run. Michigan's secondary is much more gettable than their defensive front. It just is. And you're better at pass blocking than you are at run blocking. I think that Maryland running the ball against any good defensive front is essentially them capitulating. Or maybe trying to keep the defense honest so they can't just tee off and try to get to Malik Washington. But you're fighting for bowl eligibility here, and possibly the biggest win of Mike Locksley's career. You gotta do what Dan Campbell does, what Dan Lanning does, what Day and Smart and these other great coaches have done. And you got to take a calculated risk here. And I think throwing to run against a Michigan secondary that is gettable, that is easier to throw on than in prior years, and where Michigan, their pass rush throughout the season has come alive at times, but it isn't as great as the prior 4 pass rushes, I would say, especially the 24, 23, or 21 pass rush. Trust your quarterback to make the right decision, to make the good throws, and maybe you'll come out with a win here. Executing on teams is also important. Michigan has struggled there, so if you execute on teams, you can reliably assume that Michigan will not. And in a close game where you're the home team and the environment will be sleepy, because I presume it won't be all that full, you will have a chance to win on teams, which is shocking because Michigan's bread and butter in the past has been good special teams play. But that is not the case with this Michigan team. So making your kicks, making sure to tackle and properly pursue the punt, the kick returner, trying to block the punt, not muffing it, for example, trying to block the kick. Those are all key things in this game. And last but not least, forced turnovers, which is really tied with that first point of pressuring Underwood. Take risks, because without them, you'll lose. If Maryland plays a conservative, safe game, they will not just lose, but Michigan will probably cover. Much like Northwestern, this is a bad matchup for the home team against Michigan. Michigan nearly lost to Northwestern because a lot of their mistakes that they could have corrected. If they correct those here, this could be ugly for Maryland. They need to take risks to prevent that from happening. At the same time, Michigan probably won't play their cleanest game. They probably will not correct all those errors. But if you're Maryland and a loss here kicks you out of bowl eligibility, you can't count on your opponent playing a bad game. You have to assume that they'll play their best, and therefore you try your best to play at your best. And if Michigan does not, with you being at home, with you having some non-negotiables like your 2 true freshman defensive ends and a quarterback who at times shows NFL upside, then you can come out and you can win. And that's the path, the blueprint for Maryland to beat Michigan, is to get pressure, to sell it against the run so they can get a TFLer here, to get Michigan's offense off schedule. And I don't expect them to score that many points against Michigan's defense, even if Michigan's defense is a bad day, because Maryland's offense is really horrid. But there is enough talent there where if Maryland, I think, takes a throw-first approach, they can get some plays here and there, maybe kick some field goals, maybe score a touchdown here, and make it close enough to where within striking distance to pull off an upset. Now, let's talk about Michigan's blueprint to beat Maryland. Michigan is a 13.5 point favorite over Maryland this Saturday. They should win, they're expected to win, and then they're expected to lose to Ohio State the following week. But we know, given the history of the game and given how Michigan takes that game seriously and how everyone on that roster at this point is an undefeated record against Ohio State while they're at Michigan, they are going to place special emphasis on that game. They're probably going to play a better game against Ohio State than they have against most teams throughout the year. This is a trap spot. So they need to take this game seriously, to come out healthy, to win, and hopefully win by enough at halftime or third quarter where they can start resting guys and just burn the clock in the fourth quarter, get it out of there, make sure they get back home as quickly as possible to prepare for a monumental program-defining, career-defining game for Michigan under Sharon Moore. So, what's the blueprint? What's the strategy? Well, first and foremost, for Michigan, you got to stick to your guns. Against Ohio State, there might be times where you have to go outside of that box. In fact, there will definitely be times where you have to, if you want to be efficient against that defense and if you want to be efficient against that offense, assuming that Day has learned some lessons from last year's game. Here, that's just not the case because Maryland is not that good. They're not. You are the better team. You are the more physical team. Your defense is better. Your offense is better. Both of your special teams units, from what I understand, are pretty dreadful. But if you can outplay them on offense and defense, special teams can be pretty nullified as long as you don't make mistakes in any other category. It's a lot to ask of Michigan with how mistake-prone this team has been, but I think if you just run the ball, lean on your O-line, and use some RPO to put that defense in conflict, a defense that isn't super disciplined, a team in general that isn't very disciplined, I think you can get out of there with a win, and potentially a big enough win to where later in the game you can start resting your players and make sure they can get at full strength and be at 100% for the game. Another point, another piece of the puzzle, of the blueprint, is preventing havoc plays. Michigan is 11th in havoc rate allowed per game on paper. And that is giving up a 5% havoc rate. So 9.5% of their plays on offense are havoc plays, which means an interception, a fumble, a pass breakup, a tackle for loss, or a sack. Given how bad Michigan's receivers are and how much they've turned it over this year, like look at the Northwestern game, for example, that is an amazing havoc rate. What that shows is their defense rarely allows TFLs. They do a great job in pass protection. That's what that shows right there. Their rushing attack is awesome. It is so much better than last year's, even adjusting for the easier strength of schedule. It's important, though, to prevent havoc plays here because you're not always going to play to your ceiling. Sometimes you'll play below it. The O-line hasn't had a really bad game in a while. Not saying they will this year or this game. I mean, this year they've had some bad games, but really after that Oklahoma game, they've been improving every week and gotten better and better and better. For Maryland, defensively, Maryland's defense has Sidney Stewart. They have Zahir Mathis, Cam Rice. They're 58th in havoc plays forced at a 13.2%. And their pass defense on paper, in part because of their schedule, but also because of that pass rush, is pretty good. So preventing havoc plays, preventing sacks, TFLs, making sure you're on schedule is important here to get up big early, to chew clock, to limit the amount of plays you have to run, limit the potential, the probability of suffering another injury. And it's all part of getting your team healthy and getting on out of there and winning in a business trip. For Michigan, as long as it's not a super ugly performance, I don't think covering the spread or winning by 40 matters here. Just look good, play clean football, and win. And sticking to your guns while preventing havoc plays will result in that. Some other things I think involve play sparingly. So what I mean by that is if someone is getting banged up or if someone is not 100% and you don't need them to win, sub them out. Do not play them. All hands will be needed on deck to beat Ohio State. And that game comes before this game. It does. It would be painful to lose this and beat Ohio State, but it would be more important, I think, to lose this game and then beat Ohio State than, say, win this game, but you lose by multiple touchdowns to the Buckeyes at home, for example. So play sparingly, be careful, be wise, be prudent with the roster that you have. Stopping the run with 4 will be important. Maryland is pretty bad at running the football in general. They're okay at pass blocking. They're good at getting to the quarterback. They're horrific at run blocking, and they're pretty bad at run defense. I mean, offensively for Maryland, you look at their havoc percentage allowed for havoc plays, for example, and Maryland's offense allows 11.5% of their plays to be havoc plays. It's 37th. That's above average. But a lot of that has to do with pass protection, preventing sacks, and Malik Washington not constantly turning it over, or the team not always turning it over. When you look at yards per carry from Maryland, Maryland is all the way down in terms of yards per carry at 4.58, with a negative 0.14 expected points added per rush, with a 37.5% rushing success rate. They are awful there. So you should not be blitzing if you're Michigan. You should just be sending 4 home, trying to stop the run with a light box, and guarding against their only threat on offense, Malik Washington and those receivers. Last but not least, play your game. Very similar to sticking to your guns, but what I mean by that is sticking to your guns is more so sticking to your identity. Play your game means a similar thing, but from a different angle. Playing your game means you're the better team, so you should just be able to impose your will, regardless of what your game is. Do that. Stick to your guns means stick to your strengths. So Michigan needs to do both. They need to stick to their strengths here, but they also need to be willing to just, look, go forward, play bully ball, be a little bit stubborn at times, not overly stubborn, but play your game and stick to your bread and butter for as much as you can. And since you're the better team, that will likely result in you coming out with a win. And that right there is the blueprint for Michigan to beat Maryland. They're 13.5-point favorites, but Michigan, they've struggled on the road. So this is not a gimme here. Michigan can lose this game. I don't think they will. I picked Michigan to win, but there is a pathway for them to lose. This is the pathway for them to win, and I do think they will come out of here with a win. We can now talk about USC, the path for them to upset the Oregon Ducks. And then we have a few more topics to discuss after that. Any chats that we have? Someone asked what the status for Marshall is. The status for Marshall is that I don't think he's playing against Maryland. He's not. So it'll be Kuzdal. It'll be anyone else in that running back room besides Kuzdal. So Michigan will be down their top 2 running backs. They'll have Marshall back for Ohio State. Highly doubt they'll have Haynes back for Ohio State at this point. So to clean my lips there, guys. That probably means I'm hungry or that I'm not hydrated enough. So you form that stuff on your lips. I think you know what I'm talking about. It gets incredibly annoying. Let's discuss the blueprint, though, for USC to upset the Oregon Ducks. USC is a 9.5-point underdog to Oregon on the road. And Lincoln Riley is winless against the spread in his time at USC in games outside of the state of California. Now, trends are meant to be broken, so at some point that will be broken. Maybe it will be broken this Saturday in Autzen. but they're 9.5-point underdogs, and we're talking about the blueprint here for USC to win, to pull off the upset, not just to cover the spread. It's a moral victory. I think USC's had a lot of victories this year. I think their trajectory is great. But if they want to really ramp up the expectations and get more excitement and potentially reach the playoffs this year and reach it early and galvanize the program even more than they already have, they need to win and not just cover the spread and make it close, but lose. So let's talk about this blueprint and this game plan, the path for them to pull off this upset, reasons why they can. Makai Lemon and Jacoby Lane have 1,675 total yards in receiving and 14 receiving touchdowns combined. Feed them, and feed them early. Oregon's pass defense is among one of the nation's best. Run defense statistically isn't quite as good, but is close, and they faced better rushing offenses than passing offenses this year. Test that secondary early. And even if they're winning, those are your two best players offensively. So use them. Feed them the football. They will help you get down the field and in a position to kick field goals or to score touchdowns. Ideally, touchdowns, but we're talking about the biggest reason first here. We'll move on to some others. But feeding Lemon and Lane has to be a part of the blueprint. I imagine it will be. If USC had stronger talent at running back and O-line, I would maybe put that before feeding your receivers against Oregon with how their defense is. But USC's top two receivers are more talented than Indiana's top two. They're not as deep at receiver as Indiana is. But you know how Elijah Surratt finds a way to get open? Well, Jacoby Lane knows how to make a one-handed catch or to make a possession catch. And Lemon finds ways to get open. So feeding them early on is, and throughout the game, not just early on, but targeting them early, establishing that, hey, we're gonna feed these guys. We're gonna go after your corners, after your safeties. You better be prepared. That's step one. Step two, or maybe not specifically step two, but another step to pulling this off, is selling out up front. Oregon's rushing offense is the absolute biggest non-negotiable in terms of game control, in terms of like college football rushing offense and hard-nosed football that we have in the sport right now. No one's rushing offense is better than Oregon's when it wants to be fantastic. Notre Dame's is more explosive, it's flashier, but Oregon's is more consistent. And I'm saying that when Oregon has played Penn State's defense pre-quit, and more importantly, Iowa's defense on the road, Indiana's defense at home. They faced a plethora of great rushing defenses, and they've had success against one. They had success against just at the time, probably average to good rushing defense from Penn State. Didn't have a ton of success against an elite rushing defense in Indiana. A lot of that, though, had to do with Dante Moore constantly being off schedule. Selling out up front, sending blitzes, which D'Anton loves to do, loves his blitz packages, and then stacking the box and saying, hey, your receivers aren't totally healthy, and we've seen you struggle when you face pressure or when you aren't confident in your receivers. So we're going to make you beat us through the air. Because if Oregon can get that 5, 6, 7 yards per carry, and they could even get more, given how that Notre Dame game went for USC, given how the Illinois game went for USC, then Oregon will just win. And even if the final score isn't a 20, 30-point loss, it will feel like that if they can run that way. So USC needs to sell it up front and find a way to force this to become as much of an air versus air battle as possible. Be disciplined. They struggled with that early on against Iowa, and then they regained their water and confidence, particularly at the line of scrimmage in the second half. USC against Northwestern, similar thing on defense early on, and then they got their act together. Similar against Nebraska. Even similar against Notre Dame, to a certain degree. It was USC's offense in that second half later in the game that really sold. Same with the special teams unit. Not the defense particularly. And Michigan, they pulled away. This is a team that's better in the second half than in the first half. But with Oregon, who also is a team, as we like saw in that third quarter against Penn State, and as we've seen from dominance metrics throughout the whole year, they are a team that if they get up on you big early, they're never looking back. They just aren't. If you're USC, you need to be disciplined. You need to keep this thing within 2 scores throughout the whole game and early on. If they are able to get to 2 scores, that might be too much. If they're able to get to more than that, it's game over. It's totally game over. So tackle well, be disciplined. Do not have a busted coverage. The last thing USC needs is to not trust their safeties, to not trust their DBs, and then you have to change things up and try to prevent the big play, and now Oregon can run for 4, 5, 6, 7 guaranteed yards per pop and ball control you to death. Another aspect of this blueprint is trying to run early. So feed Lemon and Lane early, late, throughout the whole game, yes. Oregon's rushing defense is scary. I think the odds are that they're going to do a pretty good job against this USC rushing offense, since it struggled on the road in just about every performance. But that's also their identity, the rushing offense. That's what Lincoln Riley's offense is all about, establishing the run and playing off of that. So try to run early. Don't abandon your identity because on paper, playing to your identity and not going outside of that will suck. Try it early on, make adaptations as needed. And an adaptation you can make is this game should be your Super Bowl. You are at 2 losses. You're at 8-2. You've made it this late in the year. And despite being as thin as you are, and USC's very thin, you're not all that banged up. And when you have gotten banged up, and you're very banged up at running back, you've been able to replicate what the starters were able to do. It's actually quite impressive. So Maava, he's your quarterback. He's healthy. You have not ran him all that much. Run him into the dirt. Do it. Because this game is, once again, it's another opportunity for Lincoln Riley to win a big game at USC. Winning here, even if it means your quarterback ain't 100% and he has to take an ice bath, and maybe consequentially you, in theory, aren't as good to go in the playoffs or as good to go against UCLA, is totally worth it. Everyone, like I imagine even recruits, and I know USC fans, and I know college football fans are just, they're not going to totally be sold on Riley unless that big game falls in his lap and he wins it. By fall in his lap, I mean he makes it fall in his lap. Sell out and stop the run, but make sure you can make your rushing attack as diverse as possible so that you can have balance. That is the blueprint for USC to upset Oregon. And at minimum, because I picked Oregon to win, I think if Oregon plays to their ceiling, almost no matter what, they're going to beat USC given the circumstances. But at minimum, doing all these things and USC's receivers playing well, their quarterback playing well, the special teams making their kicks, and USC playing with poise, with discipline. I don't know if they overlooked Iowa. Don't think they did, but maybe they did because that first half was pretty weird. Doing these things will make this game competitive, and it will give USC a chance to pull off what would be a stunning upset and the biggest win, I think, of Lincoln Riley's entire coaching career, not just his career at USC. Oh, now the blueprint for Oregon to beat USC. This is going to be pretty good too. Oregon is a 9.5-point favorite over the Trojans, and I want to discuss what the blueprint is for them to beat the Trojans. What is the blueprint for Oregon to beat USC, to game control them, and to potentially crush them, to gain confidence for Dante Moore, more confidence after that impressive performance against Minnesota, to continue to inspire confidence in others around college football, and to put yourself in a position to where if Michigan beats Ohio State, you could play for the Big Ten championship. Well, let's take a look at the blueprint here. So for the Oregon Ducks, ball control is key, and that's their style of game. That's where they're strong at. So lead with that. And if that doesn't work, then there are some other things they can do. But when you are running for close to 7 yards per carry, That's what Oregon has been able to do. They're second in yards per carry, averaging 6.93, with a 9.4% havoc rate allowed, with a 45.8% rushing success rate, and 0.15 EPA per rush. All of those, by the way, all of those are inside of the top 11. All of those are. Well, actually, the top 16. Oregon rushing success rate is 16th. But very impressive rushing offense that Oregon has. They know how to find the end zone. They know how to make explosive runs. Recently, they've been able to create more power runs, more short gain runs, which are very important to have, especially against defenses that do not allow explosive runs. Playing ball control against a USC defense that per GameOnPaper.com is giving up, is surrendering a honestly pretty abysmal 44.8% rushing success rate. You'll have a 12.5% havoc rate. The rushing success rate allowed is 115th, by the way, guys. Very, very bad. And then USC, in terms of yards allowed per carry, is 109th nationally, allowing 5.4 yards per carry. Playing ball control against that defense on paper should allow you to win dominantly. Even if the defense is off and say USC is able to score more points on the road than they usually do once you factor in the fact that Oregon's the best defense they've played on the road. Even if, say, the defense has a few busted coverages or they allow USC to score in the mid-20s, which would be pretty impressive given the defense Oregon has, or maybe even low 30s, ball control should allow you to get out with a win by its own on paper. But on paper isn't enough, and I think USC is going to try to bring their best game that they reasonably can. Oregon should at least expect that. So another aspect to pay attention to is going for big passes. Iowa was able to create some offense through the air against USC in a first half. Notre Dame was able to create some, even when CJ Carr had a pretty bad game. And Michigan had a big passing play. Luke Altmaier looked like CJ Stroud, Tom Brady on the stat sheet against USC's defensive backs. Part of that was because Kamari Ramsey was out. Hopefully he's healthy here. But USC's defense is not perfect. They're better against the pass than against the run. Part of that's their pass rush. But with Oregon's offensive line, with their tight ends, with another week of Moore working with some new receivers, and maybe they get one of DeCorian Moore, Evan Stewart back for this game, go for big passes because you want to be able to run as effectively as possible and keep balance at the same time, within reason, of course. I imagine Lynn's going to sell it to stop the run. And one thing you can do to make them not do that is, okay, we'll just go deep. And if Dante Moore is accurate, we'll beat you deep. And now you got to you got to go too high safety at least. And now that's one less person in the box. You can't play quarters or you can't stack the box. And now we can run on you. Trusting your defensive line. We'll switch to the defense here for the Ducks. Don't stack the box unless you have to, because Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane are good enough to get open, to create big plays, to get possession catches, and then create yards after contact and get to the end zone. Just do what you have to do to win. And I don't think that Oregon needs to stack the box. It's the same thing with Ohio State. Like Ohio State, they often do because they trust their secondary and they haven't faced teams that can pass on them, really. So at that point, yeah, you stack the box to get the additional pressure, to make sure a team doesn't try to run on you, to basically always put someone in a 3rd and 10 or longer than that, which is what Ohio State's pretty good at doing. For Oregon, they've played Indiana, who's been able to pass on them. USC, their top 2 receivers are better than IU's top 2. IU is the better quarterback, much better O-line when healthy, and the receiver room is deeper. They also have the better defense. If you're Oregon, I don't think you have to send more than 4 or 5 or put more than 5 or 6 in the box to slow down this USC offense, given it splits on the road, it splits at home. USC barely has a positive points per play margin on the road, where they've played Purdue, Illinois, Nebraska, and Notre Dame. Like, come on. Purdue's a below-average FBS team. Illinois is an above average, maybe good. Well, they're a good FBS team. They're just an average, above average Power 4 team. Nebraska is an above average, maybe good Power 4 team, especially when Raiola's healthy. Notre Dame's actually close to elite. But outside of Notre Dame, who they played fairly well against, outside of a few play calls, but I thought the players played well. If Riley calls a few different plays there, they may have won. They haven't looked all that good. And Notre Dame analytically looks elite, but they could just be 10th instead of 5th, and that might be a difference between them possibly winning it all, or at least being in that conversation, versus just being a good or great team and not close to elite. So if you're Oregon, you should bank on the fact that you're the best or at worst second best team USC's played all year, and you have the best defense. You have a better secondary than Notre Dame does. So trust your D-line to not need help to stop the run and get to the quarterback. And if they do, then you can make adjustments based on that. And use your tight ends offensively, because Jamari Johnson and Kenyon Sadiq are big. They are long. They have matchup edges against probably not Eric Gentry, because Gentry's also big and long, but like Desmond Steffens and USC's other linebackers or safeties, yeah, you have matchup edges against them. So utilize the fact that you have better bodies, especially at tight end, and you can use those tight ends in a variety of ways to get down the field offensively and to open up USC's defense. And finally, put USC's defense in conflict. So utilize RPO and Dante Moore's legs. If you're able to run on them, which you should, then you can, use that to really open up the RPO and the pass and really open up the short and medium game for USC, and maybe even get a big play if they send the house and you have like a quick slant open and you can hit one of your receivers for a big gain, or Sadiq can break multiple tackles, or you run into the blitz, get by it, and De'Air Hill or Noah Whittington or Jordan Davison can take it to the house. And utilize Moore's legs too. This is a big game for Oregon. This is going to be, on paper, a tougher game than the Washington game. Be willing to use his legs if you have to. That's the blueprint for Oregon to emerge victorious from a big top 15 matchup, a college game day caliber matchup against the USC Trojans. Some more blueprints to get through, then we'll get to some other topics and we can close this out. Pretty beautiful. After this, I'm going to go on a walk with my dad, but then I'll get all of these videos out. A lot of them will be uploaded tomorrow. Thursday and Friday will be days where we have tons of content out, but probably I would say at like 9 p.m., maybe a little bit after that. A lot of these previews will be out. Same with the rankings reaction. Tomorrow morning, we'll get these blueprint videos and the rest of them tomorrow morning and afternoon. And then we'll have a live show tomorrow, and that will be the stuff for Friday and Thursday afternoon. Someone said Ducks by 30. I have thoughts on that later. We'll talk about it. Kamari Ramsey sitting out this game would be huge. Hoosier-ish. Thank you for being here. Thank you for helping out the channel. Shout out to him. They do need him at safety. If he doesn't play, what will happen is Oregon, outside of them screwing up, which they usually have like a drive a game where things just go absolutely wrong, but outside of them messing up, they would score on every possession and it would snowball very quickly. I mean, not Devin Boykin, but Bishop Fitzgerald, both were transfers from NC State. Boykin went to Indiana. Bishop Fitzgerald went to USC. Both have been really good this year. Bishop Fitzgerald is really good, but it's just really him and Ramsey in that safety room. Like they don't have any depth, really. This is the story of USC. When healthy and when they play well, they're a top 10 team. If you only have to play USC at home, they could even be flirting with top 5. But that's not how football works. Perfect conditions, like think of like the worst ideologies in history, like the ones that caused the most death. They were all about creating what they viewed as the perfect world as perfect conditions. You can never create perfect conditions. USC in perfect conditions is better than a lot of teams. Like if you were to do rankings based on teams in their own perfect conditions, USC's probably like top 5, honestly, or close to it. But what separates them from these other teams like Oregon is I've seen Oregon handle adversity way better. USC's getting better at that. The previous USC teams under Riley do not win that Iowa game. Like they're making progress in that category, but they're just not quite there yet. And you see that with the home road splits and how radically different they are. Or when Ramsey goes out and the defense just completely falls apart. They don't have the depth yet to get to that point where they can create the best case scenario in game. As of right now, they're kind of boxed in by certain circumstances. But we'll get back to this game. I have one more segment to do on this game. We'll get back to it. But I want to talk about the blueprint for Nebraska to beat the Penn State Nittany Lions first. This is a big game for Matt Rule. It's kind of homecoming for him. He was a walk-on at Penn State, played under Joe Paterno, had some success there. He loves the Penn State job. He has a relationship with Pat Kraft from his days at Temple. He's not going to take the job. It's not going to go to him. He signed an extension unless he signed an extension and then goes for some reason, which would be pretty weird. But this is a big game for him because he's a 9.5-point underdog. And Nebraska, for this entire year, has not been a bigger underdog than in this game. I think it shows how they're skeptical about Latif. Maybe the market is. And it also shows how much respect Penn State at home gets from the sports books. And that Penn State is like a top 25, top 20 team in the power ratings. They're very similar, for example, to 2021 Nebraska. That's what Penn State is. If they have a huge talent edge over you, they won't lose to you. But if it comes down to a game that's about coaching and that's about finishing, yeah, you can get them. The blueprint for Nebraska to beat Penn State, well, that's the wrong way of phrasing it. How you beat Penn State is quite simple. It's how you beat 2021 Nebraska. You get them in a close game, in a tight, uncomfortable spot, and you likely will win. Because no team has been more battered, more beaten down, and more demoralized than Penn State has this year. Penn State is the biggest failure of 2025, and they know it. I know it. You know it. And Terry Smith's done an admirable job, and I think has actually improved Penn State's culture, but he's not a head coach outside of on the interim basis. He's a leader, but he's not a great CEO. So Nebraska is the coaching edge here. But the path and the blueprint for Nebraska to win this game is much more complex. After all, they're 9.5-point underdogs, and let's be real about this. They do not have Penn State's roster. Penn State right now, in their two deep, in their starting lineup, across their whole roster, has way more future NFL players than Nebraska does at this current moment. They have the more talented roster. They're also at home. And with them coming off a win, they'll probably have a bit of a kick in their step and some energy. And those fans will still come out and they'll still cheer their team on hard. Just watch that Indiana game. Watch that game where that stadium was full and it was loud and it did have an impact on the Hoosiers. But the blueprint for Nebraska is based on, or at least I think it will be or should be. I don't usually like to follow the should path because I'm not a coach. I'm not nearly as qualified as any of these guys. But I think the blueprint for Nebraska will be the dual threat run game. Penn State with Knowles this year. Some blame it on Knowles. Some blame it on the injuries. You can maybe even blame it on the fact that, I don't know, that Oregon game sucked the life out of that team. Whatever your angle is, Knowles and his defense have sucked this year at defending the mobile QB. Gronowski killed them. Mendoza early on was able to kill them. They were able to clean some of that up, probably because they didn't want Mendoza to take a ton of hits, and Penn State's D-line in general beat up Indiana's offensive line. But QB run has killed them this year. And with Emmett Johnson and the improvements in Nebraska's offensive line, with Elijah Pritchett, Rocco Spindler, Henry Lutovsky, Sam Sledge, Gunnar Gatula, and anyone else whose name I may have missed on that offensive line, or Justin Evans-Jenkins, they should be able to run well on this Penn State defense. They have a dual threat QB. They have one of the best running backs in the nation and potentially the best in Emmett Johnson or something close to that. And their offensive line has improved as the season's gone on. Penn State this year, in terms of yards per rush, they are all the way down at 68th, allowing 4.98 yards per carry. They allow 0.02 more EPA per play per rush attempt than average, and they have a 43.6% success rate. Meanwhile, statistically, a lot of this is because they faced bad pass offenses, like Ohio State tore them up, but Nebraska's pass offense is not Ohio State's. They've done a good job defending the pass, and they have a 13.7% havoc rate. So if Nebraska can run here and stick to that and play well enough on defense, they will win. A lot of those are ifs, but the dual threat rushing attack, I think, is their biggest non-negotiable and biggest edge here against the Nittany Lions. Man coverage, I think, will also be a part of this blueprint. Penn State's receivers could not get separation against Ohio State or against Oregon. When they were able to get behind them, they got behind the zone. That's what they did. For Oregon, some of those plays behind, they got behind the safety for that one Devontae Ross touchdown. For the other passing one, it was a pop pass, and that was a lot of motion behind the line of scrimmage, and Penn State's offensive line and quarterback just kind of willed them to get into the end zone there. For Ohio State, when Ohio State ran zone, Penn State could pass on them at times, or they had open receivers. When they pressed and when they ran man or very tight zone, no one was open. Everyone was covered. So I think Nebraska, with their secondary, especially their corners, Andrew Marshall, Sear Wright, who are at least great college corners, if not potential future NFL corners, try to man them up. And I don't think you'll get separation. And Grunkmeyer is not a statue, but he's also not very mobile either. So I think that you can get away with running man and not relying on him to run all that much. This also, of course, depends on whether or not you can stop the run, because, if they just say, okay, receivers, you're going to block or you're going to try to run down the field to get the defensive backs to go with you so we can run to that side, or run and there's fewer people to stop the back, and they're able to get past the initial level of defense, the D-line, then maybe you won't want to do that. But you can also maybe try it if Penn State wants to come out and pass the ball, especially downfield. And Terry Smith's been adamant about that. So that's something to keep in mind. Use your receivers, too. Nebraska's receivers are as talented as Penn State's defensive backs, where, again, Penn State's pass defense is overrated because they were able to get pressure on Mendoza and they were down Surratt. Iowa doesn't have too much of a passing offense. Neither does Michigan State. Neither do any of their three non-conference opponents. Oregon did, but again, this Penn State defense in that Oregon game with a healthy Rojas and with a season and something to play for and a head coach that wasn't broken was way better than it is now. So use your receivers and let Latif sling it, because against UCLA he made some accurate throws, and I think he's a talented player. Equal special teams is a big edge for Nebraska, because usually that's how Penn State can get you, is special teams. That's how Nebraska's been gotten in the past. This is one area where this Penn State team is different from 2021 Nebraska. In terms of the overall analogy, losing a bunch of close games, being super talented, but not exactly being clutch or having great coaching, that Nebraska team had awful special teams. This Penn State team is amazing special teams. But this Nebraska team also has amazing special teams. So keep that up and play to it. And with that being equal there, if Nebraska can work these other areas, at least unlike what nearly happened to Iowa, you won't have to worry about a special teams mistake, biting you in the rear. And last but not least, superior coaching is involved here. Nebraska, with Rule and with Holgorsen, easily outclasses Kotelnicki and also outclasses Terry Smith. Now, I still think Jim Knowles is a wonderful DC. I'm not selling my stock on him, as a lot of people are after this year, and I do think he's better than John Butler. But Butler has surprised me in many ways, And Penn State, from a staff standpoint, could also be checked out a bit here, even with that win over MSU, because there obviously many of them are not going to be here next year. Some definitely will be, I think. Others will definitely not be there. So Nebraska's the coaching edge. If this comes down to a close game, and by close game I mean it's tied in the fourth quarter, or it's a one-score game where it's truly been equal, not a one-score game where Nebraska makes it one score but they have to kick the football back, I think Nebraska will win. That is a big if, given Penn State's a 9.5-point favorite for a reason, and Penn State also has some matchup edges that we'll talk about in a different segment. But that is Nebraska's blueprint to win. They certainly have a fighting chance, and what a massive win this would be if Matt Rule's able to come out from Beaver Stadium with a win over his alma mater. And then finally, for this blueprint segment, we have to talk about and discuss Penn State. Penn State earned their first win in Big Ten Conference play over Michigan State, 28-10, outscoring the Spartans on a 28-3 run after that long touchdown by Elijah to Tolliver. They really dominated that game. You can see it on the Parker Fleming Stats of War Twitter page, where he posts the success rate margins, and Penn State's was among one of the most impressive success rate margin performances of the week, of week 12. In week 13, they have a different test. Nebraska at home. They're 9.5-point favorites over the Cornhuskers, but Nebraska has a head coach in a season that they are still fighting for. Nebraska has a bye, and you know that they're going to try to bring their A game here, especially Rule. This will be a kind of personal game for Rule, being at his alma mater. It's at a big stadium. They're a big underdog. This is the most points Nebraska's getting on a betting line all season long. So Penn State needs to take this game seriously. They need to game plan for it. And it would also be a big win for Terry Smith and Penn State's pride. The blueprint for Penn State to win here is their trench advantage. They have the superior offensive and defensive line. They do. Their O-line is more proven. It's full of more NFL players than not just Nebraska's O-line, but also Nebraska's D-line, and it is bigger, much bigger, significantly bigger than Nebraska's D-line. And Penn State's offensive line and D-line this year are a little bit undersized. They actually they lost weight to try to run more outside zone, and I just think that was kind of a big mistake in a sense. Like, last year's run offense worked for them tremendously. They were bigger, and their O-line last year was much better at run blocking. They're probably better this year at pass blocking, but last year they were better at run blocking, and a part of that was their size edge. They're smaller this year than last year, but for the first time in quite a bit, they're going to have a pretty tremendous size advantage over a defensive line. And their rushing attack has improved throughout the year as they've moved to Katron Allen being running back one and just featuring Nicholas Singleton when they think he's getting hot or in specific situations. Utilizing that trench edge on the offensive side of the ball and on the defensive side of the ball, where this is going to be one of the better pass rushes Penn State's or Nebraska's played in a minute. And the run defense, we'll see, but Nebraska struggled at times running the ball outside of when Emmett Johnson can just do his thing because he's absolutely amazing. So this is the nexus point. This is the root of Penn State's blueprint to win, is their trench advantage. Off of that, they can get pressure on Latif. Denida Sutton is a future day 2, maybe could be a day 1 NFL draft pick at defensive end. Him and Zariah Fisher, Chaz Coleman, if he plays, and any other pass rushers they have, need to get home on Latif. Nebraska is probably going to go with a run-first approach here with how hot Johnson's been, with how Latif can run the ball, and with their O-line improvements, but they are going to pass the football. And it would be really good for Penn State if they can make it so Nebraska really only feels confident running the ball, and therefore, with Jim Knowles and enough talented players, they can probably attack a one-dimensional Nebraska offense. Use Katron Allen offensively and not Singleton in this game. Well, by not Singleton, I mean don't use him primarily. Use him in certain situations because he is faster than probably any player on Nebraska's defense. Allen, though, he is the perfect running back against a Nebraska defense that is not exceptional at tackling and that isn't big. So Allen's the back that can fall forward for yards. He also has underrated burst to him. He has power. He has leg drive. This is one of the smaller defenses and less physical defenses that Penn State's played in the Big Ten yet. Oregon's and Ohio State's and Indiana's, definitely better. You then look at Iowa's, definitely better. They've had to play possibly 4 top 5 defenses. This Penn State offense has. That's crazy. And then Northwestern, similar to Nebraska, but better up front, I would say. Not as good at secondary. UCLA, like, that's the only defense that's worse in terms of run defense and physicality than this Nebraska unit. And you're not playing UCLA on the road. You're getting them at home after you kind of had somewhat of a culture reset. Like, this Penn State team, how they've been performing is better than how they performed that fateful Saturday against UCLA that really sealed it for James Franklin. Use Katron Allen, the bruising back, the guy who can fall forward, pick up extra yards, and be Mr. Reliable here. I wouldn't be shocked if he gets like 25 carries or more in this game. Would not be shocked at all. And speaking of the other running back, Nicholas Singleton, get him in space because he's faster than this Nebraska defense. This Nebraska defense is going to be in conflict. They might send, and they're going to send pressure. Get him in space, run him against the blitz sometimes, or get him to a point on a screen or on a like short check down route out in space, and he'll make stuff happen against this Nebraska defense. He can outrun any Nebraska defender. And overall, you have the better roster than the Cornhuskers do. You have more talented players from a blue chip ratio standpoint, from an NFL draft standpoint. You are the better team. That's why you're favored by 9.5 points. Like Beaver Stadium, they're given the same 3-point Vegas home field advantage. It's probably closer to 6, maybe even a full touchdown. But even take that away, in neutral field, Penn State would be favored by about a field goal over the Huskers. And power ratings would agree with that, or they'd be favored by even more. They're the better team with the better roster. I think Nebraska is the coaching edge. So you better bring the scripted drives, utilize your talent to the best of its capability, because if this is a close game, I don't think Penn State trusts itself, and I don't think we trust, nor should we trust, Penn State in that situation. But they're favored by 2 scores to win here, and they have a lot of scenarios where they could cover and win this thing big. That's the blueprint for Penn State to beat Nebraska, and they got to play Rutgers on the road in Week 14 to potentially earn bowl eligibility if indeed they do win this game. A few special topics to discuss here. Topics about how the Big Ten can level up, how the ACC and Big 12 can level up. And we'll do one more video discussing discussing Oregon and USC. Gonna take a quick break here, just a very quick break. I'll be back here. Just sit back, relax. If you want me to answer anything you have, make sure to send in a super chat, and I will answer it. Thank you for your patience, everyone. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate it. Yeah, we'll talk about now how the Big Ten can become the best conference in college football. The Big Ten can become the best conference in college football by making sure that its smaller teams, its bottom feeders, care. And that relative to the rest of college football, its bottom feeders are average teams. This is what the SEC does. Their lower third, their lower quartile, their lower half, whatever way you want to divide the pie, is still high quality pie. It's still rich, creamy, flavorful, sweet pumpkin pie. That worse half, worse whatever number you want to use to divide the pie up into. The worst portion is still high quality. Obviously, the top tier is high quality. The Big Ten's top tier is the best tier, the tastiest tier, the creamiest crop in all of the sport. But its worst tier and even some of its middle tiers are pretty ugly. There's some mold growing on that food. Some of it's just cold dead. Like, look at Wisconsin. And they're keeping Luke Fickell. Maryland's keeping Mike Locksley. You think Rutgers, until recently, cared about football? Ask Schiano about NIL. He says they never really tried it. UCLA is kind of a dead program. Does Northwestern care about football? Does Purdue care about football all that much? The lower third has to step up if the Big Ten wants to become college football's best conference. The top also needs to keep winning. If the lower third rises up, if the lower half, again, however many teams are in that category, if they rise up but the SEC stay the same and the SEC's top starts winning again and dominating, then the Big Ten's upgraded, but they're not the best. So those two things have to happen. It used to be the Big Ten's worst and top were not the nation's best, and they were overall a pretty mediocre conference. There was a time in the 2010s where the ACC, and for the parts of the 2000s too, where the ACC was probably the stronger conference. Like when Florida State was on top, and he had Clemson do well, like early 2010s when Jimbo was at his peak and Dabo was arriving at his. The SEC was probably in that conversation. The Big 12, there was a time when the Big 12 was better than the Big 10. Times have changed now. It can be the same thing for the Big Ten again. They cannot lose their edge at the top, where I think they have the best cultures, the overall best coaching, and the best development at the top. They cannot lose that. They have to retain that or even improve upon it, even though they're already the best. And they have to have your Purdue, Northwestern, UCLA, Maryland, Rutgers, etc., Michigan State, Wisconsin. They have to step up their quality of play on the field. Keep the elite coaches too. That's another factor of the top continuing to win. Make sure that Dan Lanning and Ryan Day and Curt Cignetti, whoever Penn State hires if he's a good hire, Lincoln Riley with USC, Jerome Moore at Michigan if he pans out, Matt Rhule at Nebraska if he pans out, keep them home. Don't even let them go to the NFL. Make them enjoy this place so much that they don't want to leave. And level up in recruiting, conference-wide. Some of the top programs can afford to do that, but USC's come along in that department. Ohio State's gotten more aggressive in recruiting. Michigan has. Oregon under Lanning has been a maverick in their own right at recruiting. But I'm talking about Nebraska. Don't have the 100th best recruiting class again in the month of November. Don't do it. For Wisconsin, don't have fewer than 15 commits in the month of November. For Washington, I think they're doing a pretty good job, all things considered. I mean, Minnesota is. For Indiana, keep building your reputation and start signing consistent top 25, top 20, maybe even a top 15 class or even a top 10 one at some point with how successful you've been with Curt Cignetti. For Penn State, rebound and make sure that you recruit as well as you did under Franklin or preferably better than some of his most recent recruiting classes. Level up in recruiting, in NIL, in using the portal, modernize across the conference, not just at the top where they've been obviously dominant. And finally, this is complicated. I do not have an answer here, but this definitely plays into the SEC being the best conference, and the Big Ten, while getting closer, still not being there. Down south just has better high school football. Part of it's because they care about it more. Part of it's the weather, and the hotter it is, the bigger you are. Typically, the bigger things are, the animals get bigger, the trees, the plants get bigger. The humans, if they're as adequately fed as people in the north, will also get bigger, stronger, faster. It's just how things work in nature typically. There's other things too, like some political stuff, historical stuff. Some people just have a preference for warmer weather, for example, but a lot of it is a care factor and also the political factor too. I'm not educated to speak on any political factors or fundraising factors or that stuff, but Big Ten fans just simply caring about college football more, and then the fans of those kids succeeding in high school, and the parents care more about their kids' success in high school football, that will lead to better high school football in the Midwest, in California, on the West Coast, in the Northeast, in the DMV area, where Big Ten schools are located, and that will translate to better talent that is also kept home more often than not. That is how the Big Ten can become the best conference in college football. You level up in recruiting, you make your bottom schools care as much as they can relative to the top schools. Your top schools continue to dominate, and you keep the elite culture and coaches you currently have at the top that are among the best in the sport. Now, how can the ACC and Big 12 catch up to the Big 10 and the SEC? The Big 12 and the ACC catching up to the Big 10 and SEC, or maybe I said SEC twice. How can the Big 12 and the ACC prevent the Power 2 from pulling away further? Well, that's a very complicated question. It's a loaded question with a complicated answer, but I'm going to try to give some things that I think might work. No guarantees. They're lagging behind the Big Ten and the SEC in a pretty big way right now. But I don't want a Power 2. I do not want what the NFL is. I want there to be a few conferences, not all of them equal, but where they're within striking distance of each other, and all of them can at least field one national title contender a year. The Big 12 is doing that a little bit with Texas Tech, and that's because of elite investment. They're willing to outspend anyone or spend close to the top of the food chain. They're in the state of Texas. They hired a coach in Joey McGuire who's an elite recruiter, has high school connections all across the state of Texas. They're winning on the field because they have a fantastic general manager and great support staff and strength and conditioning staff. They're doing it all. The model that Texas Tech has set forth before us, the model that Clemson did back in the day, you just got to adapt it to the new rules. The model that Miami is trying right now, they haven't totally failed yet this year. They failed last year. Looks like they probably will fail this year, but that's not a guarantee yet. The ACC and Big 12 at large, not just those select teams, needs to follow that model. Florida State needs to get more serious. Utah and BYU, keep doing what you're doing. Arizona State, leverage your massive alumni network. For other schools like Duke, NC State, UNC, a lot of these Carolina schools, care about football more. Basketball's a cool thing. Spend in basketball, but maybe spend a bit more in football, or find a donor who specifically cares about football and tab him to support your football program. Everyone needs to care about college football in these two conferences if they want to have any hope at being in the same stratosphere as the Big Ten and the SEC. Even if they all care about football, it's not a guarantee they'll be in that same category as those two. I think that's especially the case for the ACC because the Big 12's gotten a jump start with Texas Tech and some of these other programs. But this will not hurt, for sure. Another point is that the big spenders succeed. So Texas Tech, they're succeeding right now. BYU, they spend. Look at their basketball program, look at their football program, like getting the commitment of Ryder Lyons. They're successful. Baylor has been a big spender under Dave Aranda, or at least recently they're coming to it, and that's probably the only reason they haven't collapsed with his coaching. Miami's leveled up because of their approach to NIL. Clemson, they don't spend a lot in the portal. They don't brand themselves as an NIL program, but they spend more than people think they do. And Florida State, to get those portal classes they had, required them to spend in some capacity. The big spenders succeed. It's not an exact science, but it helps. And these conferences need their big spenders to succeed. So the worst thing that's happened to the ACC is that Miami has continuously shot itself in the foot despite spending the way they have. That is the worst possible thing that's happened. The ACC would have definitely preferred, and it probably would have been better for college football if Miami made the playoff in 2024 and not Clemson. It would have benefited the ACC more. It would have benefited the ACC had Florida State not fallen off to the same degree that it did. Now, maybe that will save them from never being able to get back to the mountaintop, because I don't think Norvell was the guy to take him there. But that still sucked and was a huge gut punch. SMU, I can't even believe I left them off this list. They're massive spenders. Having them continue to level up talent-wise and eventually get to a point where they're always contending for the playoffs, huge. Getting Virginia Tech to improve under Franklin, getting Baylor to improve, the Kansas schools investing more in football. These things will help them stay within striking distance to where the Big Ten and the SEC won't totally separate from them, or maybe if they can, they might have enough respect for them to not do them in. Tough non-conference scheduling. This is a way you can stick it to the Big Ten and SEC. If you improve, you can get to a point where you can schedule them every year. You can risk a quality loss, which won't hurt you all that much, in exchange for potentially big wins. Utah, this year, I have watched Utah closely. They could beat some of the top SEC and Big Ten teams this year. None of those teams would be a guaranteed blowout for BYU. Now, many of them could blow out BYU. I think many of them would blow out BYU. Or BYU and Utah. But they would not have a guaranteed win over Utah, especially if they played them on the road. They just wouldn't. BYU, a little bit of a different story, but BYU would be in the upper third of the Big Ten, certainly in the upper half. They would beat up on a lot of those smaller Big Ten teams that plenty of Big Ten teams can't do. Texas Tech? Say Texas Tech had Penn State's schedule. So they had to play Oregon, Iowa, Indiana, and Ohio State. They had to play like 4 of the nation's best defenses, 3 wonderful offenses. Texas Tech probably goes 9-3 and maybe even 10-2 with that schedule. There's a world where they even go 11-1. Like, they could beat anyone on that schedule. At Ohio State would obviously be the hardest game, especially if we assume all those teams are the same as they were in those matchups. But Tech is legit, man. Like, Tech can win it all. And we've talked about that before on this channel. We've talked about it. You can search up that video. It's like literally like why Texas Tech football can win it all, or something like that's the title on the channel. Scheduling these tougher out of conference games will help boost your overall strength of schedule, your credibility, and you can have an opportunity to earn these big wins, which can, pull recruits away from competitors outside the conference or even inside the conference. It's the same thing with the ACC. Like, Miami scheduling Notre Dame. Respect. Proud of you. Same thing with keeping Florida on the schedule. Like, that's a good thing. And winning both of those games, even with the 2 losses in ACC play, that's huge for the ACC. That's huge for Miami. I mentioned this earlier, but if more Texas Techs can pop up in the Big 12 and the ACC, it will not just be better for college football. It'll be better for these conferences for sure. Because many SEC schools are incapable of doing what Texas Tech is. A&M can. Texas can. Alabama can. Georgia can. Not necessarily exactly in the same spending department, but they can sort of level that out with their reputation, for example. Maybe LSU can. Outside of that, I don't really think anyone else can do what Texas Tech does from a money standpoint. Miami, for example, outspends possibly every SEC school minus the Texas ones, like from an NIL standpoint. So, Clemson, do you have any wealthy alumni? And can you maybe force Dabo Swinney, or if he retires and you get someone new in there who's all about spending, Just spend, 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 and make sure you have a good enough staff to utilize that properly. Does anyone else in the Big 12 or ACC have wealthy donors or isn't utilizing them? Go to them, sell the program to them, and hopefully get some serious investment. The more Texas Techs these conferences can produce, the better. And finally, keep talent home. So a lot of these schools, Georgia Tech has been trying to do this, and they've had some success. Miami has had success in Florida. Clemson, they're falling off a bit there, and they can't afford to have that happen. Tech is doing a really good job getting in key players. For Utah, like BYU, Utah has some good high school football. Like, keep those guys in state. For the Kansas schools, for the Midwest schools, like whenever you have that rare talent pop up, try to keep him home. I know that you are not outside of some of the Big 12 schools in Texas and some of the ACC schools and the Carolinas, Virginias. This is more of an ACC thing, honestly, than a Big 12 thing. But it applies to the Big 12 too. Keep your talented players home. And if you invest, you spend, and you win, you will be able to do that. That's how the Big 12 and ACC can try to catch up to the Big 10 and the SEC. Maybe even if they do all those things, they won't, but maybe they will. It never hurts to try, and they'll certainly catch up or at least close some of the ground with those conferences if they do those things. Now is the big video. This is the final one, the final segment that I want to discuss. And then we'll get on out of here. So, this is something I'm doubling down on. And I don't feel the best about it because whenever you double down, whenever you call your shot, you take a risk. So, I'm taking a risk here. And I am going to give you all 15 reasons why Oregon dominates USC. Oregon is a 9.5-point favorite over USC Saturday night. And I think that the Ducks dominate here. Oregon is going to win big. They're going to dominate the game. It will be evident, I think, very early who the better team is and who's going to win. And I think that Oregon's going to put USC in a bit of a blender here. And I'm going to give you 15 reasons why that is. Just to start off, let me go over with some advanced power ratings and analytics with you all. In points per play margin, this is how much more points do you score per one of your plays compared to one of your opponent's plays. USC is plus 0.234. Oregon is plus 0.331. When you look at game control from ESPN, USC, they are 17th. Oregon is 4th. When you look at overall efficiency, Oregon is 4th. USC is 12th. And when you look at FPI, Oregon is 3rd with a 23.8 rating. USC is 10th with a 19 flat rating. Let's get into the 15 reasons why Oregon will dominate USC. Reason number 1 is that Oregon just has the better roster. The superior roster. The vastly superior roster. Oregon is bigger. They are faster. They are deeper. They are more talented. If you question that, if you think that is insane, we will use an objective service, an objective measurement to calculate a team talent composite. One that is faulty because it doesn't factor in development, but I got to give development to Oregon because they made Bear Alexander work and USC could not. Oregon is 5th in team talent composite with 941.22 points, an average player rank of a 91.07, 6 5-stars, 52 4-stars, 86 overall scholarship players. USC has 81 scholarship players. They are ranked 17th. They have 847.53 roster points, 3 5-stars, 38 4-stars. Someone has the superior roster here, and it's not USC. And Oregon's offensive and defensive lines are just better, stronger, faster. Receivers pretty equal, but Dante Moore is more of an prototypical NFL quarterback than Jaden Maiava is. Oregon's defense, in terms of efficiency metrics, is way ahead of USC's. We'll talk about this in a bit. But superior roster is just pouring the concrete in the foundation of my argument, where when someone has the much superior roster than you and you're playing on the road, which we'll talk about in a bit, it's hard to win. But we're not just talking about Oregon winning here. We're talking about them dominating. The superior staff plays into that. Lanning's staff is better. Lanning at this point in his career is better than Riley at this point in his career. Lanning's done a better job building Oregon than Lincoln Riley has USC. Now, part of that's because Riley inherited a worse roster than Lanning did. Lanning inherited elite lines of scrimmage. Riley did on the O-line in year one, but they were not that deep. They hadn't recruited as well, had to use the portal more. Part of that was Riley's choice. That's why it's year 4, and Oregon's still better than USC when both programs are in year 4, but I will concede that Lanning inherited the better situation. However, look at the big games where Oregon, it was actually on the same day, too. USC hosted Penn State, and Oregon hosted Ohio State. And the difference between those teams in a power rating sense was probably pretty similar. Between the margin between the Trojans and the Nittany Lions was probably similar between the margin, similar to the margin between the Ducks and the Buckeyes. Oregon won that game. Albeit both games were very close, it could have easily gone the other way. But Oregon found a way to win, to earn an onside kick, to strip a football away from Quinshon Judkins, who never fumbles, and to get in Howard's head. USC led big at the half. It shouldn't have been a close game. And they choked to James Franklin, who's now out of his job and can't win a big game to save his life. Look at how both teams handled 2023, where USC did bring a decent amount back. So did Oregon. Oregon maybe had their best season ever under Lanning to this point, and maybe their best team under Lanning in 2023. Too bad we'll never know because they missed the playoffs and lost to Washington twice, but 2 close losses, dominated everyone else. It's similar to this Utah team this year, but much more talent. And power ratings wise, they would have finished number 2 if not for power ratings, not understanding that Florida State didn't have a roster when they played Georgia. USC that year went 7-6. Couldn't do anything on defense. The head coach difference goes in favor of Oregon. DC difference, I don't know at this point. Lynn, I think, is better than Lupoy, but Lupoy's commanding the far better defense and has really taken strides this year. Bigger strides than Lynn has from year 1 to year 2. Offensively, I think Riley's one of the best play callers in the game, but Oregon's overall offensive staff, probably better than USC's overall offensive staff. From a developmental angle, a coaching angle, recruiting angle, you get the point. It's closer than the roster difference. I will say that because I have a lot of respect for USC staff, but I think Oregon's is at least slightly better in this instance. Now the concrete's hardening. The foundation's full. The bricks are laid. So let's start building the house here. The house of this argument is going to be supported by steel beams, maybe titanium beams, or I could really exaggerate and use like tungsten, one of the strongest metals on earth. That is what Oregon's run game is. It's the ultimate non-negotiable. USC's rushing attack is absolutely phenomenal. No one they've played this year has a better rushing offense than USC, outside of maybe Michigan when healthy, maybe Notre Dame when things are going very well. But Notre Dame, for whatever reason this year, has been hit or miss with some havoc plays, and with the type of offense they run with Denbrock, lots of outside zone. You've seen it when they've played Ohio State or in the playoffs last year. That's very hit or miss. If things don't go perfect, that can often result in negative plays. From a consistency angle, Oregon has the best rushing offense USC's played all year. Second in yards per rush, averaging 6.93. They are 11th in EPA per rush, averaging 0.15. They're ahead of USC in both those categories. They're slightly behind USC in success rate, but to be fair, Oregon has played Penn State's defense pre-injury, and then Oregon's on the or Iowa's on the road. Indiana's at home, but Indiana's defense, their bread and butter, is stopping the run. USC has played a Michigan rushing defense that on the road has had some issues. Notre Dame's rushing defense has been phenomenal. Illinois has been okay, and they were able to stop USC stone cold on the ground a few times. They have the better rushing offense than the Trojans do here, on top of facing a easier run defense than the run defense that the Trojans will have to play. So the run game advantage is sizable, that will allow them to play ball control. And USC will have to find ways to generate big plays here or play above their average, their median on defense to win this game. The huge talent edge on defense, which we alluded to earlier. Man, oh man, that is, it's insane when you look at the numbers. So let's look at the numbers here. In defensive yards per carry allowed, Oregon is 11th. They're barely behind Ohio State. They're barely ahead of Iowa, Michigan, Indiana, for example. They're barely behind Texas, Georgia. The only defense that's really significantly ahead of them in that category is Auburn, who's one of the best, if not the best defense at stopping the run. They're even ahead of Texas Tech there in yards per carry allowed. In success rate allowed and EPA per rush allowed, they're lower, but not as low as USC. USC is a whopping 109th in yards per carry allowed. It gets worse when it's on the road, too. When you look at, for these defenses, just straight up opponent-adjusted EPA per play allowed, Oregon's 6th, barely behind Ohio State. USC is 52nd, barely behind Central Michigan and Ole Miss and Utah. Utah's probably underrated in that metric, but whatever. Besides the point, they haven't played the same schedule. I get that. The Ducks have a pretty big talent gap on defense, and you look at ESPN's efficiency metrics. Oregon's defense is among one of the best in America. It's 5th, only behind Oklahoma, Texas Tech, Ohio State, and Indiana. It's just ahead of Miami's at 6th, Iowa's at 7th, Utah's at 8th, Texas 9th, Wake Forest, Alabama, BYU, Notre Dame. USC is all the way down at 56th. Again, just behind Ole Miss, just behind Illinois, Penn State, West Virginia. Yeah, it's been a rough year for USC's defense. It's been an awesome year for Oregon's defense. The offensive line comes into play too. So Iapani Lololu is one of the best centers in America. His tackles are Alex Harkey and Isaiah World. His guards are Dave Uli and Emmanuel Pregnon. Ex-USC guard Emmanuel Pregnon, who's better than any of USC's guards. I like Oregon's offensive line here, which is the Big Ten's best or second best, maybe behind Iowa or a healthy Indiana offensive line, to really put pedal to the metal here against a USC D-line that has had some good moments, but is just inconsistent enough, same with their backfield, to give up big rushing plays and to give up consistent yardage on the ground and not always get home to the quarterback. That's why Lynn has to blitz a lot. He doesn't just like to send blitz packages forward, but he kind of has to at times. Reason number 6 is Oregon's defensive line. Oregon is 11th in yards per carry allowed. We already talked about this. The Ducks have not generated tons of sacks this year, but they still have NFL players on that defensive line, such as Mateo Uyunglele and Tatum Tuioti at defensive end. At defensive tackle, they got Amari Washington and Bear Alexander. By the way, Amari Washington and Bear Alexander. Bear Alexander is 6'3", 302 pounds. Where's number 1? Amari Washington, 6'3", 330 pounds. Where's number 32? Pretty impressive players on that inside on defense, and they're very young there, outside of those two. So this defensive line, they're going to get after it. They're going to get to the quarterback. They're going to pressure him. They're going to make life, I think, a little bit hellish for this USC defensive front, or offensive front, which is good. USC's offensive line is among one of the nation's better O-lines. There's a reason it's a Joe Moore Award semifinalist. I do not think it's as good as Oregon's. And I think that Oregon's defensive line has a chance to, since this O-line and offense is on the road, potentially put that entire unit in a blender. 7th is cornerback play. Brandon Finney and Ife Obadegwu. What caliber of corner do you think they are? Because I think, personally, that they are all-American caliber players. Brandon Finney is a true freshman. He's been playing like an All-American. He has a pick 6 in that Indiana game, 2 forced fumbles, 22 total tackles. Phenomenal. Theron Johnson was great at Northwestern, and he's their backup, despite them getting him in the transfer portal. And Ife Obadegwu has 5 passes defended and 16 total tackles. Finney is 6'2", 203 pounds. It's like perfect size for a future NFL corner. Ife Obadegwu is a redshirt freshman, and he is at a height 6'1" and 203 pounds. Both these corners are from Maryland. Impressive production Maryland high school football must have for producing both of these elite cornerbacks. Oregon had a size problem and a skill problem, a skill issue at defensive back last year that was exposed in the Ohio State game. They do not have that this year, in part because of their corners, but also because of their safeties, which are physical, especially Dylan Thieneman. And then if you want to include nickel, Jaden Kennedy in that conversation, you can as well. Oregon's safety room, again, outside of Thieneman and Kennedy, is certainly one that is, decently young, but they're also experienced in those two positions. And look, they're physical. They make the it factor plays. They tackle well. Dylan Thieneman, Jaden Kennedy, Dalen Austin, Aaron Flowers, Kingston Lopa, very good players. I mean, Dylan Thieneman was wanted by Ohio State. Said he has an interception, 4 pass defended, 49 total tackles for Oregon. Dalen Austin has a pick. And then Jaden Kennedy, that 5th defensive back on the field, he has 24 total tackles, 3 passes defended. Physical safeties, fundamentally sound, don't allow a ton of big plays. And against a USC wide receiver core that is vicious, you need those corners and safeties to play at a high level, and they're going to. 9th is the running backs. So Oregon's running backs have all accounted for 25 touchdowns total out of 26 rushing touchdowns. The other goes to Brycen Moore. You have De'Aaron Hill Jr., you have Noah Whittington, you have Jordan Davison, Jaden Lamar, Jay Harris. It is one of the deepest running back rooms in college football. And they are so young outside of Whittington. Mackay Hughes isn't even playing for them, despite the fact they got him in the portal. Like, they totally busted on that guy. And their running back room is still absolutely phenomenal. It's crazy. They will be able to rotate if someone goes down or if someone gets tired or if they're not working out. And they have a variety of skill sets. They can mix and mash at running back. And that all goes into play with an offense that when Dante Moore is playing at his ceiling, which his ceiling's pretty much limitless, they are a high-flying operation. Dante Moore has 2,190 passing yards for 21 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, a 168.8 passer rating, a 72.5 QBR, which is 28th nationally. 6'3", 206 pounds. He also has 183 rushing yards. Wouldn't be shocked if they don't run him all that much because of that, hamstring. But maybe that's healed up and they'll run him some in this game. They may also not have to because of how effective he can be as a passer of the football. Reason number 11 are Bryce Betcher and Jerry Mixon. These are physical linebackers, phenomenal players. And Mixon and Betcher have combined 1.5 sacks, 3 interceptions, a forced fumble, and 7 passes defended. Betcher leads the team in tackles. Mixon is 5th. A lot of upside, a lot of fight, a lot of physicality there. And whether they're blitzing or they're in coverage or they're in cleanup duty with tackling, they'll be able to do it all. They will. And it helps that they have a wonderful supporting cast around them. 12th, Oregon's long tight ends. So Kenyon Sadiq and Jamari Johnson have 7 total touchdowns. Sadiq is a freak athlete. We know this. But Jamari Johnson can be too. Sadiq is 6'3", 245 pounds. He has 407 receiving yards and 6 receiving touchdowns this year. He's been great. Jamari Johnson, he is 6'5", 257 pounds. He has 226 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown this season. The offense for Oregon seems to possibly be coming into form, and it definitely will, I think, when they get healthy. these tight ends have a size advantage over USC linebackers not named Eric Gentry and their safeties. So I expect them to be targeted and to also be blocking their tails off. Number 13 is USC on the road. They are 41st in road points per play margin nationally. Now, their road slate's been tough, like Notre Dame on the road, Nebraska on the road, Illinois on the road. But you factor in Purdue there, and Illinois nor Nebraska are top 25 teams for power ratings. They have not performed well. And, like, Notre Dame showed improvements on secondary against him, and then Nebraska held Maiyava to completing fewer than 50% of his passes, and Oregon's the best secondary they've played. I really don't like the fact that they have to go on the road to play this Oregon team who has an extra day of rest and is going to be probably furious that Minnesota scored 13 points. And they're going to want some revenge on USC for, I don't know, flipping their commits, becoming more of a force, becoming more of a known team, getting some attention. Oregon feels disrespected a little bit. That is not one of the reasons why I think Oregon will win this game decisively. That's a pretty redundant and stupid reason. But the extra rest can matter. Iowa was in a physical war with USC. That can result in players being a little bit banged up or sore after that. Oregon had kind of their pipe dream day offensively outside of that one weird lateral that was fumbled. They rested their starters in the fourth, and they have an extra day of rest in general. So that matters and can help, especially when, as we've discussed earlier, Oregon already has the talent and depth edge over USC. And last, but certainly not least, Autzen Stadium. It's possibly the loudest stadium in college football. I don't care that it's a 12:30 p.m. local time kick. It's going to be loud. This is going to be the toughest and most rambunctious environment that USC's played in all year, minus maybe Notre Dame at night. And even then, I think Autzen will probably be louder than that just because of how it's constructed. So there's a ton that goes against USC here. There are some things that go against Oregon, but much of the potential matchups and factors and positions go for the Ducks here. So I'm pretty convinced that Oregon is going to dominate USC. They're going to win. They're going to cover. I think they'll already be covering the spread at probably halftime. And I think at the end of the game, Oregon will win decisively here. I don't know the scope of the blowout, but I think they're going to at least do what Texas Tech did to BYU, scoreboard-wise. So win by 3 scores. It could be worse than that. From a dominance perspective, I don't know if it will be as dominant in parts as Texas Tech BYU was, but I think it will be around that. This game, depending on how out of hand it gets, could, and I mean could, get close to Indiana, Illinois. I don't think it'll be that bad. I don't even think it has the potential to reach that, but it could get close, and that would be very bad for USC. All right, I wanted to include more at the end in hindsight of how good I think Oregon is, but I think this video already showed that. So, thank you guys so much for watching. We're going to get on out of here. I got to upload some of these videos. I know that it is Wednesday night. There's probably other things to do. We will be live tomorrow. Don't know what time. I said like 2 days ago I wanted to go live at 10 a.m. Didn't happen today. Hopefully it can happen tomorrow, but we'll see if that's even possible. Thank you guys for watching.